A millionaire loses a suitcase with $100,000. A humble woman shows up at his door with a surprise. What happens next is unforgettable. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Lauren Mitchell's breath hung in the chilly air of the nearly empty subway platform in downtown Chicago. The stark fluorescent lights overhead made every concrete pillar appear even more lifeless. At 2 in the morning, trains ran infrequently, and the distant hum of the next arrival gave her a few minutes to reflect. She clutched a small stack of overdue bills in one hand and her keys in the other. In her mind, she was running over tomorrow's to-do list at the cafe she owned, Mitchell's Corner, trying to figure out how on earth she would pay for repairs that simply couldn't wait. Lauren was 38, with warm brown eyes that always carried traces of concern. Her dark hair, pulled into a loose ponytail, looked dull under the harsh lights. It had been 6 months since her divorce from Kevin, a successful accountant who once promised her the world but ended up giving her a stack of debt and heartbreak. Now, she was on her own, sharing a modest one-bedroom apartment with her ailing mother, Caroline. Caroline had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's 2 years earlier, and each passing month forced Lauren into another difficult choice. Most recently, whether to hire part-time in-home care or risk leaving Caroline alone. The train's rumble intensified, but Lauren's thoughts remained fixed on the day's troubles. Mitchell's Corner had a leaking sink in the kitchen. The city inspector had issued a warning: fix it soon or face fines. Between the cafe's thin profit margins, her mother's medical bills, and the rent, she felt pulled in every direction at once. When the train screeched to a stop, only 2 other passengers got off. Lauren lingered at the far edge of the platform. She looked around to see if she could spot a payphone or a trash can for the empty coffee cup she was holding. That was when she noticed a black suitcase tucked behind a metal bench. It looked oddly unattended, and in this era of constant caution, an abandoned bag often meant trouble. Her first instinct was to alert security, but the platform attendant's booth was empty, and there was no one else around. For a moment, she wondered if it belonged to one of those passengers who had just disembarked. Maybe they're rushing, she reasoned, but a prickling sensation in her chest urged her to check. Setting her bills and keys aside, Lauren approached the suitcase, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone to shout, "Hey, that's mine!" But no one did. With each step, her heart pounded faster. She wasn't looking for a problem, her life had enough, but some silent pull made her crouch down and inspect the case. It was made of thick black nylon, scuffed around the edges, but still in decent shape. The zipper was slightly open at one corner. She thought she glimpsed a neat bundle of something inside. Her breathing tightened. It could be clothes or just random junk. The train behind her sounded its departing bell. She watched helplessly as the doors slid closed and it rolled away, leaving her alone on the platform with this mysterious bag. She inhaled deeply, telling herself to keep calm. Then she slipped the zipper open another inch. Her eyes widened. Tucked inside were stacks of $100 bills held together with rubber bands. This can't be real, she thought, her breath nearly catching in her throat. Nervous sweat formed along her hairline despite the chilly air. She hesitated, then reached in far enough to touch one bundle. It felt solid, authentic. For a moment, she stared at that money as if it were a live wire. Here she was, behind on payments, watching her mother's health decline and struggling to keep her cafe open. $100,000, if her guess was correct, could wipe out every debt. But what if it was someone's emergency fund? What if it was ill-gotten cash or tied to something criminal? Her conscience battled her desperation. Caroline's face floated into her mind's eye. Lauren could nearly hear her mother's voice from her healthier days, reminding her about honesty and doing the right thing, no matter the cost. "Those values define you," Caroline would say, placing a gentle hand on Lauren's shoulder. The memory made tears spring up unexpectedly. She carefully zipped the suitcase shut, heart pounding. There was no immediate answer for what to do next, but leaving it there felt wrong. Pocketing the money felt even worse. With trembling hands, Lauren spotted a half-torn luggage tag. Only a partial name remained: Alexander Thorne. She tried to read the rest, but the ink was smudged beyond recognition. The overhead speaker crackled, announcing the next train would arrive in 10 minutes. Lauren's legs felt shaky, but her decision was firm. "I'll take it," she whispered under her breath. "I'll find whoever this belongs to." Because if she didn't, the guilt would haunt her, and perhaps, just maybe, doing the right thing, however hard, would change her own fortune. As she gripped the suitcase, she felt the weight of its contents, both physical and moral. Suddenly, the platform lights flickered, intensifying the lonely atmosphere. Lauren glanced at the sign displaying the next train's arrival and realized there was no turning back now. If the owner was truly out there, she would find him. And if the money represented a test of her character, she intended to pass. Late that night, Lauren returned to her modest apartment on the outskirts of downtown, her heart still racing from the shock of what she had found. She locked the door behind her, the suitcase firmly in hand, and tiptoed around the sleeping form of her mother, Caroline, who had dozed off in an armchair by the television. The muted glow of a late-night talk show danced across Caroline's face, highlighting the soft creases around her eyes, lines etched by age, worry, and the slow fade of memory. Lauren gently pressed the power button on the remote. Caroline stirred, eyes fluttering open for a brief moment. "Oh, Lauren, you're home," she mumbled, her voice distant with confusion. Then she sank back into sleep. Lauren tucked a throw blanket around her mother and slipped into the narrow hallway that led to her own bedroom. Once inside, she carefully placed the black suitcase on the bed. The overhead bulb flickered to life with a dull hum. She felt like an intruder in her own space. She gazed at the bag as if it might explode at any moment. Then, with cautious resolve, she opened it again, half expecting the money to have vanished or turned out to be counterfeit. It was all still there, neat stacks of $100 bills. They weren't brand new bills fresh from a bank. Some had minor folds and creases. Her eyes drifted to a bundle of envelopes nestled in the corner, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Lauren hadn't noticed them before in her rushed discovery. They looked worn, like personal letters handled many times over. Unsettled, she lifted the ribboned packet. The top envelope read, in elegant handwriting, "For Bella." The name brought a wave of emotion. There was no address on the front, just that single word. Her immediate thought was that these were personal messages, someone's cherished keepsakes. She felt a pang of guilt at the idea of prying further, but the existence of these letters made the suitcase even more of a mystery. She gently set the letters aside, though they seemed to emanate importance. A million questions buzzed in her head. Who is Bella? Why was this money left at a subway station? And who is Alexander Thorne? The half-torn label attached to the suitcase was her only clue. Lauren pulled out her phone and did a quick search for the name Alexander Thorne, Chicago. Instantly, several hits appeared, articles about a corporate mogul, features on charity galas, and references to Thorne Enterprises. He was apparently a prominent figure in the city's business scene. With each click, a photograph of a tall, dark-haired man with a measured smile stared back at her. She felt a growing sense of unease. This was no anonymous traveler. If the money belonged to someone so powerful, how could they have misplaced it? Or was there something more sinister at play? Gently setting her phone aside, she tried to think logically. The right thing to do was to contact this Alexander Thorne. Yet fear kept creeping in, fear of being accused of stealing, fear of getting caught in something illegal, fear that her good intentions would bring her trouble. Slumping onto the bed, Lauren rubbed her temples. Her divorce, her struggling café, her mother's relentless condition, life had already thrown her enough curveballs. Should I really get involved in this? She wondered. Part of her, the part weighed down by overdue bills and high medical costs, whispered a different question. What if this money could solve everything? A lump formed in her throat. The voice of her mother echoed in her memory. Do what's right, no matter how hard. Lauren's eyes stung with tears. She glanced at the bedroom door, imagining Caroline out there, dozing in the armchair. Even with advanced Alzheimer's, her mother sometimes had these miraculous moments of clarity where her advice felt as solid as ever. In one such moment, weeks ago, Caroline had reminded Lauren, "We stand by our morals, sweetheart, or we stand for nothing." Those words echoed now. Determined, she rose and retrieved her laptop. She typed an email to Thorn Enterprises' general inquiry address. To whom it may concern, I believe I have found a suitcase belonging to Mr. Alexander Thorn. It contains items that may be very important. Please let me know how I can return it. Her finger hovered over the send button, her stomach churned, and a dozen doubts flooded her mind, but she clicked it anyway. Exhaling shakily, Lauren closed the suitcase and tucked it in her closet. There was no telling what would happen next. She half expected someone to bang on her door any second. Instead, the apartment remained quiet, except for her mother's soft breathing in the living room. She turned out the light and slipped under the covers, feeling the weight of the day settle in her bones. It was as if the universe had thrust a monumental secret into her hands. As she drifted off to a restless sleep, one thought kept circling back. Returning the money was the right thing to do, but those letters might matter far more than any cash. She silently vowed not to let fear or desperation compromise her integrity. Sunlight filtered through threadbare curtains the next morning, illuminating Lauren's cramped bedroom. She woke up with a start, the events of the previous night rushing in like a tidal wave. Immediately, her eyes darted toward the closet, half expecting the suitcase to have vanished. Of course, it was still there. She felt a twist in her stomach, torn between moral resolve and practical desperation. After dressing quickly in jeans and a simple grey sweater, she found Caroline in the kitchen, staring blankly at a cabinet. "Mom, are you looking for something?" Lauren asked softly. Caroline turned, confusion painting her features. I think I was looking for sugar," she said hesitantly, glancing around as though she wasn't sure where she was. Lauren guided her mother to a seat. "I'll make you some tea," she offered, placing a reassuring hand on Caroline's shoulder. The lines on Caroline's face relaxed slightly. Moments like this, though common, still broke Lauren's heart. There were fleeting mornings when Caroline seemed almost like her old self, but today was not one of those days. As the kettle boiled, Lauren's phone buzzed. She quickly retrieved it, her heart rate spiking when she saw a short email. "Thank you for contacting Thorn Enterprises. We will forward your message to Mr. Thorn's personal assistant. Please keep the suitcase secure until further notice." No explanation. No personal note, just a polite acknowledgement. She wondered if Alexander Thorn himself would ever respond. She spent the afternoon at Mitchell's Corner, going through the motions of running her small café. The usual morning crowd trickled in, office workers grabbing black coffee, an elderly couple sharing a blueberry muffin, a tired nurse from the clinic down the street. Lauren exchanged polite smiles, but her mind was elsewhere. Every time she glanced at the old clock by the menu board, she was reminded that time was running out, not just for the cafe's finances, but for her mother's care. By noon, she had sold fewer pastries than expected. Her friend Maria, who helped out part-time at the counter, noticed Lauren's distant expression. "Everything okay, boss?" Maria asked, leaning in with concern. Lauren hesitated, then offered a half-truth. "Just a lot on my mind. Bills are stacking up." She couldn't bring herself to mention the suitcase. It felt too big, too complicated. Maria nodded sympathetically. "Well, I'm here if you need me." A lump formed in Lauren's throat. She appreciated Maria's kindness, but was afraid of dragging anyone else into this. Around 2 o'clock, when business died down, Lauren used the lull to check her phone. Still no further emails or calls. She felt a pang of disappointment and frustration. Does Alexander Thorne not care that I have a suitcase stuffed with his money? The real weight of temptation hit her as she counted the day's meager earnings in the cash register. In the past few weeks, she'd had to skip her own health insurance payments to keep her mother's coverage afloat. She thought about the thick stacks of $100 bills in her closet. It would solve so many problems. But at what cost? Trying to clear her head, she closed up early and headed home. Caroline was watching an old sitcom, her eyes brightening momentarily as Lauren entered. "I used to love this show," Caroline said, as if she recalled something nostalgic. Then her face fell blank again. Lauren gently sat beside her mother on the couch. "Mom, do you remember how you always taught me to do the right thing, even when it's hard?" she asked in a soft tone. Caroline blinked, a mild flicker of recognition. "Yes, dear. It was important to your father and me," she replied, her voice trailing off. Lauren squeezed her mother's hand. "I found something very valuable, and I'm trying to do the right thing with it." She didn't expect a coherent response, but Caroline's gaze held Lauren's for a moment, and a tear slipped down the older woman's cheek. "I'm sure you'll make the right choice," she whispered. That simple statement reaffirmed Lauren's decision. She made her mother dinner, scrambled eggs with toast, the only thing Caroline felt like eating. Afterward, she returned to her bedroom to check her email once more. No new messages. Anxiety gnawed at her. She pictured Alexander Thorne in a sleek office, his time too precious to deal with a missing suitcase. Before going to bed, she stood in front of her closet. Her reflection in the mirrored door revealed worry lines carving themselves into her face. "I won't give in," she murmured. The money promised instant relief, but that choice clashed with every principle she held dear. With a trembling sigh, she snapped the closet door shut. Guilt and temptation haunted her equally. She hoped that Mr. Thorne, whoever he was, would come forward soon and claim not only the money, but also those mysterious letters. Because in her heart, Lauren believed those letters held a value she could never replace, no matter how many bills she could pay. 2 days passed with no word from Thorne Enterprises. Lauren's anxiety began to spiral. Each morning, she scanned her inbox with a desperate hope of seeing a personal message from Alexander Thorne himself, but all she found were promotional emails and final notices from utility companies. Her café was operating on borrowed time, and she was behind on her mother's medical expenses yet again. On a grey Wednesday afternoon, a health inspector strode through Mitchell's corner unannounced. Tall and stoic, with a clipboard in hand, he examined every corner of the kitchen and café area. Lauren's heart slammed against her ribs as she watched him scribble notes. After circling the small dining area, he leveled his gaze at her. "Ms. Mitchell," he began, "we've discussed the plumbing issues before. If repairs aren't completed by our next inspection, we'll have to close you down temporarily." Lauren felt heat rising to her cheeks. "I understand," she managed, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm doing my best to secure funds for the repairs. I just need—" "You have 2 weeks," he interjected firmly, handing her a form. "After that, we have no choice." With a curt nod, he left. She sank onto one of the worn wooden chairs, reading the official notice through a film of tears. Maria, who had been organizing the pastry display, approached and rested a comforting hand on Lauren's shoulder. "It'll be okay," Maria said softly, but Lauren wondered if it really would. That evening, she found Caroline in a state of agitation, pacing the living room. "Where is my classroom?" "I need to get back to my students," Caroline said, eyes darting around as if lost in a school hallway. Lauren's chest constricted. Her mother had been a teacher for over 3 decades. In these moments of confusion, Caroline often reverted to that role, searching for chalkboards and desks that existed only in her memory. "It's late, Mom," Lauren said gently, guiding her to the couch. "You're home now. Let's sit and rest." Caroline's eyes brimmed with tears. "Did they fire me? Am I too old?" she asked, panic in her voice. Lauren swallowed hard. "No, nothing like that, Mom. You retired a while ago. Everything is fine, okay?" She hated lying. But telling the truth, that Caroline's mind had betrayed her, was far too cruel. Caroline eventually settled into a restless sleep. Lauren covered her with a soft blanket, her thoughts circling back to the suitcase. If she used a fraction of that money, the cafe could stay afloat and Caroline's care would be assured. But every time that idea crossed her mind, she felt her conscience recoil. Unable to sleep, she brewed a cup of chamomile tea and checked her email once more. Finally, a new message appeared. "Dear Ms. Mitchell, my name is Margaret Hayes, and I serve as Mr. Thorne's personal assistant. He would be most grateful to speak with you in person about the suitcase you mentioned. Kindly visit Thorne Enterprises at your earliest convenience." Relief and dread surged in equal measure. She sipped her tea, rereading the email. So, he finally reached out. The next morning, she arranged for Maria to cover the cafe and for a neighbor to watch Caroline for a few hours. Then, clutching the black suitcase, she hopped on a bus headed to the upscale business district. The ride felt surreal. Skyscrapers looming overhead seemed to belong to another universe, one in which people wore designer suits, conducted multi-million-dollar deals, and had personal drivers waiting outside marble lobbies. Lauren could practically feel the weight of her second-hand denim jacket and the scuff marks on her boots. By the time she arrived at a glittering glass tower labeled Thorne Enterprises, her nerves were shot. Inside, the lobby boasted a sleek, modern design, polished floors, minimalist art, and a long reception desk manned by uniformed staff. Lauren approached a stern-looking receptionist and explained she had an appointment with Margaret Hayes. Moments later, she was escorted through a security checkpoint, then guided into a quieter corridor where Margaret greeted her. The assistant was in her early 50s, her poised demeanor softened by kind hazel eyes. "Ms. Mitchell," she said, offering a polite smile, "I'm so glad you could come. Please follow me." They took a private elevator to one of the top floors. Lauren's stomach churned as she clutched the suitcase. The doors opened into a lavish reception area with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Chicago's skyline. The city stretched out in infinite detail below, a reminder of how small her own world had become lately. Margaret led her down a corridor, stopping at a large wooden door. "Mr. Thorne is inside," she said, pausing to look Lauren in the eye. "He's been anxious to recover what you found." Lauren nodded, unable to muster a verbal reply. She stepped into the office. It was spacious, flooded with natural light, and dominated by an imposing mahogany desk. There, Alexander Thorne stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a polished aura, he turned to greet her, yet the moment his gaze landed on the suitcase in Lauren's hand, a wave of vulnerability passed over his otherwise confident features. In that charged silence, Lauren felt a mix of relief and trepidation. She was about to discover why this money, and perhaps something else in that bag, mattered so profoundly to this powerful man. It was a meeting she could never have anticipated, one that could change both their lives in ways neither fully understood. Alexander Thorne closed the distance between them with measured steps. He wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, but there was a weariness in his eyes that belied his poised appearance. Extending his hand, he offered a firm but polite handshake. "Ms. Mitchell, thank you for coming," he said quietly. Lauren swallowed, her nerves taut. I wasn't sure what else to do with this," she admitted, lifting the black suitcase slightly. "I just knew it didn't belong to me." Margaret hovered in the background, ready to assist, but clearly intent on giving them privacy. Alexander gestured toward a seating area with a low table and comfortable chairs. "Let's sit," he said, settling into one of the seats. Lauren followed suit, carefully placing the suitcase on the table. The hush that settled felt almost reverent. Margaret stepped out, closing the door gently behind her. Alexander reached for the bag's zipper, and Lauren stiffened. Even though she knew the money was his, watching him open the suitcase triggered her own swirl of emotions. He pulled out the neatly packed stacks of cash, sighing with relief, but what caught his full attention was the bundle of letters tied with a worn blue ribbon. Lauren watched him lift the envelopes as though they were made of the most delicate glass. His gaze flickered with raw pain. She shifted awkwardly, uncertain if she should speak. At last, he drew in a shaky breath. "You have no idea how much these letters mean," he murmured. "They're from my late wife, Rebecca." Something constricted in Lauren's chest. She could see the emotion etched in his face. I didn't read them," she said quietly. "I only saw they were for someone named Bella." "I guessed it was a child," Alexander nodded, setting the letters down carefully on his lap. "Bella is my 6-year-old daughter. These were written by Rebecca in the months before she—" his voice faltered, "before she passed away." Lauren's eyes grew misty. She understood loss, maybe not on his scale, but she empathized with the heaviness that comes with watching someone you love slip away. "I'm really sorry," she offered gently. "I hope returning these brings some comfort," Alexander nodded, his voice tight. "Comfort, yes, more than you can know." He turned to the stacks of cash still in the suitcase. "I appreciate your honesty in bringing all of this back. Most people would have kept the money," Lauren finished quietly, unable to hide the trembling in her voice. "I'll admit, the thought crossed my mind. It's a lot." She gave a sad laugh, remembering every time she'd eyed that small fortune with desperation. "But my mother raised me to do the right thing." He regarded her thoughtfully. "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She is," Lauren replied, a hint of a smile emerging. Then reality reasserted itself. "Mr. Thorne, how did this suitcase end up on a subway platform?" "I was worried it might be something illegal." Alexander's expression shuttered for a moment, a trace of embarrassment surfacing. "I honestly don't know how it ended up there. I had it in my car earlier this week. I was juggling so many responsibilities, my business, Bella's needs. I might have placed it down, got distracted, then forgot to lock the trunk. It's possible someone tried to steal it, got spooked, and abandoned it. I wish I had a better explanation." His eyes flicked to the letters again. "I've been carrying them around for weeks. Maybe I thought having them close would somehow keep Rebecca's memory alive." Lauren nodded, absorbing this. "Well, I'm just glad I found it. The money? I'm sure it's important, but the letters seemed far more personal." Alexander clenched his jaw, a mixture of gratitude and regret washing over him. "I can never repay you for returning Rebecca's letters, especially with everything you might be going through." He paused, seemingly hesitant. "Is there anything I can do for you, Ms. Mitchell? Anything at all?" She hesitated. An image of her struggling café, overdue bills, and her mother's medical care flashed in her mind, but she shook her head, not wanting to appear mercenary. "I just wanted to return what wasn't mine," she said softly, though her voice quavered with the weight of unspoken needs. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit, produced a business card, and handed it to her. "If you change your mind about anything, please call me. I'd like to at least thank you properly, maybe discuss a way I can help." He locked eyes with her, sincerity evident in his tone. "You've given me a gift I can't put a price on. I'd like to repay you in some way." Lauren took the card, her mind spinning. She felt relief that she'd finally done the right thing, but a gnawing uncertainty remained. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," she managed, rising to her feet. "I appreciate it." He rose as well, the letters still clutched in his hands. Their eyes met, and for a moment there was an unspoken acknowledgement that fate had somehow crossed their paths. "Please call me Alexander," he said quietly, following her to the door. "I have a feeling we'll speak again." As Margaret re-entered to escort her out, Lauren felt the weight of the last few days lifting off her shoulders. Yet, walking through the polished corridors of Thorne Enterprises, she couldn't shake the sensation that their meeting was only the beginning of something far more complicated and potentially life-changing than she ever dared imagine. Lauren stepped out onto the Chicago sidewalk, still feeling the echo of her encounter with Alexander Thorne in the corridors of Thorne Enterprises. The morning wind whipped strands of her hair around her face as she clutched the business card he'd given her. She kept replaying his words, "Call me if there's anything I can do." Part of her longed to accept his help. The other part insisted on independence. Later that evening, back at her modest apartment, she found Caroline sitting quietly with a half-finished cup of tea. The television was on but muted, the soft glow dancing across her mother's tired features. Caroline glanced at Lauren with a curious spark. "How did it go?" she asked, as if she'd been more aware of Lauren's day than usual. Lauren offered a gentle smile. "It was interesting. I met Mr. Thorne. He was very grateful." She hesitated, unsure how much her mother could retain. "He offered to help me." Caroline's brows knitted together in a moment of clarity. "Help you? How?" "That's the question," Lauren answered, sinking onto the couch. "He seems genuine, but I don't want to take advantage." Caroline reached for Lauren's hand. "There's a difference between taking advantage and accepting kindness. Remember that, dear." The next morning, a gust of cold air hit Lauren as she pushed open the door to Mitchell's corner. Maria was already there, tying an apron around her waist. Business had been painfully slow, and the looming deadline for plumbing repairs left Lauren anxious. She fired up the coffee machine, mentally calculating the costs for a new sink installation versus patchwork repairs. At midday, she was in the middle of steaming milk for a latte when her phone vibrated. Balancing the phone between her ear and shoulder, she heard a crisp, familiar voice on the other end. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Margaret Hayes, Mr. Thorne's assistant." Lauren stepped away from the loud hiss of the espresso machine. "Yes, hi, Margaret. Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," Margaret replied courteously. "Mr. Thorne would like to invite you to dinner at his residence next Thursday evening, if you're available. He also asked me to mention that his daughter, Bella, will be there. He's hoping to properly thank you." Lauren's heart fluttered. Dinner at his residence. The idea felt like stepping into a completely different world, one she wasn't sure she belonged in. But the invitation also seemed like an opportunity, maybe to discuss her business, or at least see what Alexander meant by offering help. She agreed, feeling both excitement and apprehension. When she hung up, Maria raised an eyebrow. Big plans? Lauren exhaled. It looks like I'm having dinner with Alexander Thorne and his daughter. Guess he wants to say thanks. Maria's eyes lit up in amusement. Dinner with a billionaire? Sounds like a fairy tale. Shaking her head, Lauren tried to stifle a laugh. Trust me, my life is anything but. The days leading up to Thursday were a blur of balancing the cafe's demands, Caroline's care, and a swirl of internal doubts about what this dinner might entail. Caroline had more moments of confusion, at one point not recognizing her own living room. It weighed heavily on Lauren, reminding her that she couldn't afford to be reckless about finances or her time. When Thursday finally arrived, Lauren closed the cafe early. She had borrowed a simple navy dress from Maria, a bit more polished than her usual jeans and sweater. Standing in front of her mirror, she smoothed the creases, wishing she felt more confident. A car from Thorne Enterprises pulled up to her apartment building just after 6. The driver, an older gentleman named Ralph, greeted her with a polite tip of his cap. She settled into the leather-back seat, heart pounding the entire ride. They arrived at a grand, gated estate on the outskirts of the city. The house, more like a mansion, stood behind a carefully manicured lawn and a circular driveway. Lights glowed from within, illuminating tall windows and elegant columns. Lauren swallowed her nerves, following Ralph's direction to the front door. Margaret opened it with a warm smile. Ms. Mitchell, welcome. Please, come in. She led Lauren through a spacious foyer where polished marble floors gleamed under a chandelier. Mr. Thorne is just finishing up a call in his study. An anxious flutter settled in Lauren's chest as she took in the opulent surroundings. Framed photos lined a nearby table. One showed Alexander smiling alongside a beautiful woman with gentle eyes. Another captured a bright-eyed little girl. Lauren realized the woman must be Rebecca, his late wife. Ms. Lauren, a small voice piped up. Lauren turned to see Bella, wearing pink pajamas adorned with cartoon horses. The girl held a plush toy in one arm and stood half hidden behind a doorframe. Lauren knelt. Hi, Bella. It's nice to meet you. Bella regarded her with a solemn gaze before stepping closer. Dad said you found something important. Mommy's letters. Lauren felt a tug at her heart. I did. And I'm really glad I could bring them back. The girl's eyes flickered with a blend of curiosity and sadness. Then she nodded shyly, retreating further behind the door. Lauren realized in that brief moment how fragile Bella's world must feel. Margaret guided Lauren into a warm, inviting sitting room. A fireplace crackled softly, and a table was set with what looked like a simple meal. Lauren took a seat on a plush sofa, the realization sinking in. This was no mere formality. She was stepping, perhaps unknowingly, into Alexander and Bella's private realm, a place shaped by loss, love, and hope. Somewhere upstairs, footsteps signaled Alexander's approach. Lauren quickly straightened, heart pounding again. She was about to discover what exactly he had in mind when he said he wanted to thank her. Little did she know that this dinner would mark the beginning of a journey, one that would challenge her deepest fears and guide her toward unexpected alliances. Alexander Thorne descended the sweeping staircase, dressed more casually than Lauren expected. Dark trousers and a sweater, a stark contrast to his usual business suits. His expression was warm yet reserved as he greeted her. Lauren, I'm glad you could make it, he said, motioning toward the sitting room. How was the drive? She offered a small smile. Very comfortable, thank you, and thank you for sending Ralph. Alexander nodded. I wanted to make sure you felt welcome. Then he caught sight of Bella peeking from behind a doorway. He gestured for her to join them. Come on, sweetheart, it's okay. The little girl shuffled over, still clutching her stuffed animal. Her eyes flicked from Lauren to her father. Can we eat in the kitchen, Dad? She asked softly. Alexander looked at Lauren, an apologetic curve to his lips. We usually have casual dinners together at the kitchen table. helps Bella feel more at home. The idea actually comforted Lauren. "That sounds perfect," she said, following them through a hall that led into a spacious, state-of-the-art kitchen. Despite the marble countertops and stainless steel appliances, the space felt cozier than the formal sitting room. A small table by the window had been set for three, complete with colorful placemats and a pitcher of lemonade. Bella climbed into a chair, her stuffed animal placed protectively on her lap. Alexander pulled out a seat for Lauren, then sat across from her. Dinner was simple: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and steamed vegetables. The normalcy of it put Lauren at ease. They started with small talk. Bella spoke little, occasionally whispering a question to her father, who would then politely include Lauren in the conversation. Every now and then, Lauren noticed Bella studying her, as if evaluating whether this stranger could be trusted. Midway through the meal, Margaret entered briefly to offer dessert options, apple pie or chocolate pudding. Bella instantly chose the pudding. Lauren laughed softly, the tension in the air diffusing. Alexander glanced between them, relieved to see Bella more relaxed. When dessert came, Bella took her pudding to the living room to eat while watching a short cartoon. That left Lauren and Alexander alone in the kitchen. She sipped from her glass of water, gathering courage to ask the question nagging her mind. "Mr. Thorne, Alexander, about your offer to help me." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You've probably guessed I have some resources at my disposal," he said, keeping his voice measured. "I don't want to overstep, but if there's anything at all, I could do to lighten your burden, I hope you'll let me." Lauren inhaled shakily. Her instincts told her to remain cautious, but Caroline's fading health and the cafe's troubles weighed heavily on her conscience. Why not at least tell him the truth, she thought. "I own a small café, Mitchell's Corner, downtown," she began. "It's been struggling lately, especially with the city's inspection deadlines. And my mother, Caroline, has Alzheimer's. I worry about her care and my ability to cover bills." Alexander's gaze softened. "I'm sorry to hear that. I know the toll caring for someone ill can take. With Bella, after Rebecca passed, it felt impossible to balance everything. I can't imagine how hard it is doing that alone." Her voice trembled a bit. "I'm trying to hold it all together, but I feel like I'm drowning in debt. I'm not asking for a handout," she hastened to add, cheeks warming. Well, part of me wonders if I should sell the cafe and focus on caring for my mom full-time." He studied her for a moment. "Would you still want to sell if your mother were healthy?" "If money wasn't an issue." Lauren paused, blinking back tears. "No," she admitted softly. "That cafe was my dream after everything fell apart. I wanted to make something of my own. It was a second chance, but it's becoming more of a financial trap." Alexander reached across the table, resting his hand near hers. He didn't touch her, but the proximity was comforting. "I get it. You want independence and dignity, but you also don't want to lose what you've built." He glanced over his shoulder, where Bella's cartoon murmured softly in the other room. "I understand the need for a lifeline. When I lost my wife, I wished someone would offer me a way out of my own turmoil." She found herself nodding, relieved that he didn't judge her for struggling. "I just can't see a path forward." He drew in a breath. "I could provide a loan. Or invest in the cafe. We could figure out terms that let you keep control, but give you the resources to fix what needs fixing. And for your mother, if she ever needs more advanced care, I know people, excellent in-home care services." Lauren stared at him, torn between gratitude and wariness. Was it too good to be true? Could she trust him? Then she remembered the sincerity in his eyes when he retrieved his wife's letters from the suitcase. "He's not an opportunist," she told herself. He's a father trying to do the right thing, just like I tried to do. You'd do that for someone you barely know, she asked. He gave a half-smile. You returned a small fortune and, more importantly, the last letters from my wife to our daughter. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. If that doesn't prove your character, I don't know what does. Lauren swallowed a mix of hope and uncertainty. Let me think about it, she said. I really appreciate the offer. Alexander nodded, respect evident in his gaze. Take all the time you need. It was a big decision. Yet as Bella's laughter drifted from the living room, Lauren felt a sense of calm. This might be her chance not only to save her café, but to open a new chapter in her life. Whether she was ready or not, she was stepping beyond the world she'd always known. For the next week, Lauren found herself caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Accepting help from Alexander Thorne, wealthy executive, devoted father, and virtual stranger, felt both promising and perilous. But each time she considered refusing, she remembered the threat of the cafe's looming closure and Caroline's upcoming doctor appointments. The clock was ticking louder than ever. One morning, she decided to pay a visit to Thorne Enterprises. Not for a formal meeting, but just to get a sense of the environment. If she was seriously considering a partnership, it wouldn't hurt to understand how Alexander's world worked. She left Mitchell's corner in Maria's capable hands and arrived at the towering glass building around midday. Busy professionals streamed in and out, dressed in sharp suits and carrying sleek briefcases. Lawrence, in her casual sweater and comfortable flats, felt underdressed and a bit intimidated. At the reception desk, a young man with a friendly smile greeted her. "Good afternoon. Do you have an appointment?" She cleared her throat. "Not exactly. I was hoping to speak with Margaret Hayes or Alexander Thorne, if either is available." "My name is Lauren Mitchell." He tapped a few keys. "Let me check with Ms. Hayes. One moment, please." Within minutes, Margaret Hayes appeared, projecting both efficiency and kindness. "Lauren," she said, extending her hand. "What a pleasant surprise. Is everything all right?" Lauren managed a small laugh. "I'm fine. I just wanted to see if we could talk about that offer Alexander mentioned." Margaret's expression brightened. "Of course. Let's head upstairs." The elevator ride to the top floors of Thorne Enterprises was smooth yet felt longer than it was. Margaret led Lauren into a sleek corner office, a smaller one than Alexander's, but well-appointed and comfortable. Large windows overlooked the bustling city below. "Alexander's in a conference call, but I'm sure he'll be free soon," Margaret explained, inviting Lauren to sit in a plush chair by a modern glass coffee table. As Lauren waited, her gaze drifted over the neatly arranged files on Margaret's desk. A wave of curiosity washed over her. "Margaret, how long have you worked for Mr. Thorne?" The assistant settled opposite her. "Nearly 10 years now." "I started when Bella was just a baby," she smiled wistfully, recalling old memories. Back then, Alexander's wife, Rebecca, was still alive. The company was smaller, but growing quickly. She was always so kind, would come by the office with Bella. Just a newborn then. Lauren exhaled softly. It must have been hard for him, losing her. Margaret nodded solemnly. Very. She passed unexpectedly, and he was left running the company and raising Bella. "I did what I could to help, but no one could replace Rebecca." There was a moment of quiet understanding. Margaret's words explained the lingering sadness Lauren had sensed in Alexander's eyes. "He must be grateful for your support," Lauren ventured. "He is," Margaret agreed, "but in many ways, Alexander's still learning to balance everything, especially Bella's emotional needs. Having you return those letters, it meant the world to him." Before Lauren could respond, the door opened and Alexander stepped in, looking slightly surprised but pleased. "Lauren," he greeted, I didn't realize you were here. She stood awkwardly. I hope it's not a bad time. I wanted to ask some questions about the investment you proposed. He waved off the concern. Not a bad time at all. Margaret, would you mind giving us a few minutes? Margaret departed, and Alexander folded his arms, leaning against the edge of a modern desk. So, you're considering it? Lauren swallowed. Yes, but I have no clue how to approach a formal partnership. I've never done anything like this. He nodded thoughtfully. We can keep it simple, a small investment in your café under fair terms. You'd retain control, but we'd have an agreement so there's a clear plan for repayment or profit sharing over time. A swirl of relief and worry blended in her chest. I like the idea. But how does that fit with your priorities? You run a huge enterprise. Why invest in my little corner cafe? Alexander's gaze softened. Because it matters to you, and you matter to me. You helped me more than you'll ever know. He spoke with quiet conviction. I see potential in you and in that cafe. I'd be remiss not to invest in something that could genuinely succeed. Her cheeks warmed. She glanced at the cityscape outside, then back at him. All right, let's figure out the details. A smile touched his lips. Great. My legal advisor, Mike Sullivan, can draft the paperwork. He's straightforward and discreet. I'd suggest we meet with him soon, maybe tomorrow, if your schedule allows. Lauren nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and excitement. Tomorrow works, she agreed. Alexander guided her to the hallway, where Margaret was waiting to escort her back down. As Lauren stepped into the elevator, she couldn't shake the sense that she was crossing into a new world, full of people and possibilities she'd never considered. The ride down was silent, but her mind buzzed with questions. Was this the path to saving her cafe and giving Caroline the care she deserved? She had left her comfort zone behind the moment she returned that suitcase. Now, she was mingling with strangers who might become friends or something more before the journey was over. When she walked out onto the bustling street again, the crisp air hit her like a wake-up call. She realized that by accepting Alexander's offer, she was officially stepping into territory beyond her familiar struggles and small neighborhood. But if she was going to save her mother, her dreams, and her sense of self-worth, it was a leap she was willing to take. Lauren arrived at Thorn Enterprises the next day feeling a hint of optimism. She had spent the morning at the cafe explaining to Maria that if all went well, they might have the funds to handle the plumbing issues and even freshen up the interior. Maria beamed, her relief tangible. Mike Sullivan, Alexander's legal advisor, was a man in his mid-40s with a relaxed demeanor and quick smile. He welcomed Lauren into a smaller conference room with a pitcher of water and neatly stacked documents. "Nice to meet you, Ms. Mitchell," he said, shaking her hand. "I've been briefed on the basics of your cafe. I'm here to help formalize your arrangement with Mr. Thorne." Alexander sat at the far end of the table, sipping coffee and offering Lauren an encouraging nod. He seemed patient, letting Mike lead the conversation. Lauren settled into a chair, her nerves fluttering. "I've never done a formal agreement like this," she admitted. Mike offered a reassuring grin. "That's all right. We'll keep it straightforward. Essentially, Mr. Thorne invests a certain amount in your cafe for immediate repairs and operational costs. You remain the majority owner, and over time, you pay back his investment plus a fair return. If the cafe succeeds, as we believe it will, both sides benefit." He slid a draft document toward Lauren. She skimmed the language, trying to piece together its meaning. "It looks fair," she managed, though legal jargon made her head spin. "But I want to make sure I'm not signing away my entire future." Alexander leaned forward. "You're not. This arrangement is designed to protect your autonomy. Think of me as a silent partner who provides capital and occasional guidance. You run the cafe your way." She breathed a little easier, but another question burned. What if something happens to my mother? If I need to step away? Alexander's expression softened. Life happens, Lauren. We'll include provisions for that. If you have to care for your mother full-time, the cafe can continue to operate with your staff, or we can discuss pausing the repayment schedule until you're back on your feet. Lauren swallowed back unexpected tears. She had expected a tougher business stance, but Alexander was offering compassion. "Thank you," she whispered. Mike made some notes. "I'll update the contract with those provisions. Once we're all comfortable, we can sign." They spent the next hour discussing practical details, timelines, potential budgets, a plan to address the city inspector's demands. Lauren found it surreal to be discussing her small cafe with a high-powered legal advisor and a corporate mogul, yet neither Alexander nor Mike made her feel less than deserving. When they wrapped up, Mike excused himself to finalize the paperwork. Lauren and Alexander lingered at the table, an unspoken tension in the air. It wasn't the nerve-wracking tension of conflict, but rather the flutter of possibility. "Thank you," Lauren said quietly, gazing at the scattered papers. "I never thought I'd be here." Alexander smiled, his dark eyes warm. "You've given me more than you realize. I'm just returning the favor." She felt her pulse quicken. Before she could respond, Margaret appeared in the doorway. "Alexander, you have a board meeting in 15 minutes, she said, looking mildly apologetic. He nodded, turning back to Lauren. "I'd love to continue this conversation, maybe over dinner again. Bella's been asking about you." Lauren's cheeks grew warm. "I'd like that." They parted ways in the hallway, with Lauren heading back to the elevator. As the doors slid closed, she realized just how different her life had become in such a short span. Only weeks ago, she was scraping by, plagued by doubt. Now she was forging a partnership with a man whose kindness and sorrow she understood all too well. Yet the heavier tests were still to come. Her mother's condition hadn't improved. Caroline's doctor wanted to run more tests soon, hinting at a potential decline in cognitive function. And Lauren couldn't ignore the possibility that Alexander's corporate world might not warmly embrace a small-town cafe owner stepping into its realm. For now, though, she chose to savor a moment of cautious optimism. The papers were almost signed. Her cafe was on the verge of a vital lifeline, and for the first time in ages, she felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could build something beautiful from the wreckage of her past. When she returned home, Caroline was napping in her armchair. Lauren knelt beside her mother, adjusting the blanket over her shoulders. "Mom," she whispered, brushing stray hair from Caroline's forehead. "Things might be okay. I think we're finally going to be okay." She kissed her mother's cheek, then let her rest. In her heart, she prayed that this fragile new beginning wouldn't slip away. Her mind spun with plans for the cafe, possible improvements, even new menu ideas to lure back customers. If all went well, she could repay Alexander, keep her dream alive, and provide for Caroline. But a small voice reminded her that good fortune sometimes invites envy or doubt from others. The real world rarely paves an easy path, especially when money, family, and fragile hearts are at stake. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. Lauren officially signed the agreement with Alexander, allowing an immediate injection of funds into Mitchell's corner. True to his word, he acted as a silent partner, letting her run day-to-day operations while Maria remained her right-hand confidant. Within days, plumbers arrived to fix the neglected pipes. The cafe finally passed inspection, much to Lauren's relief. She also planned a modest reopening event, complete with fresh paint and a few new menu items. On the day the inspector approved their renovations, Lauren wiped tears of joy from her cheeks, hugging Maria in the middle of the cafe. "I can't believe this is happening," she murmured, heart pounding with excitement. "I actually feel hopeful again." Maria beamed. "You deserve it. You've worked so hard." Word got around the neighborhood that Mitchell's Corner was back on its feet. Lauren saw old customers returning, along with some new faces, attracted by the buzz of a revamped local business. One afternoon, a tall man in a suit approached the counter. He ordered a latte, then extended a hand. "Peter Whitmore," he introduced himself. "I'm a business associate of Alexander Thorne's. Thought I'd check out this café he's been talking about." Lauren felt a slight chill, despite his friendly smile. There was something in his gaze that felt scrutinizing. She forced a polite tone. "Welcome, Mr. Whitmore. I'm Lauren, the owner. Hope you enjoy the coffee." He gave a curt nod. "I'm sure I will." She tried to brush off her unease and continued serving other customers. But from the corner of her eye, she noticed Peter surveying the cafe, almost as if he were evaluating a competitor or searching for weaknesses. When he left, he offered a distant wave. That evening, after closing, she received a text from Alexander. "Congratulations on passing the inspection. Bella and I would love to see you this weekend if you're free. Thinking of a casual lunch at our place? Bella wants to show you her new drawings." Lauren's heart skipped a beat. She responded with an enthusiastic yes. On Saturday morning, she found herself once again outside the Thorne estate. This time, she wore a bright floral blouse and comfortable black pants. She carried a small box of pastries from her cafe, hoping Bella might enjoy them. Alexander and Bella greeted her at the door. Bella's face lit up the moment she spotted Lauren. "I drew pictures of you," the little girl announced, grabbing Lauren's hand and pulling her inside. Lauren laughed, taken aback by the child's sudden burst of enthusiasm. They headed into the living room, where Bella had laid out crayons and paper. Sketches covered the table, some of a woman with brown hair serving coffee, others of a tall man, Alexander presumably, and even one that showed what appeared to be a child holding a letter with a big heart on it. "That's me with Mommy's letters," Bella explained solemnly. "Dad said you found them." Lauren knelt by the drawings, struggling to keep her voice steady. "They were very special letters," she managed, her eyes flicking to Alexander. He stood nearby, hands in his pockets, watching them with a mixture of pride and sadness. "She won't talk about Rebecca much," Alexander murmured after Bella scurried off to find more crayons. "But drawing helps her." Lauren nodded, understanding the power of small steps in healing. Sometimes the best way to deal with loss is finding a safe way to express it. He cast a thoughtful glance her way. "I think you've helped Bella more than you realize. She wouldn't let anyone near those letters before." A warmth spread through Lauren's chest. "I'm happy I could help." They moved into the kitchen, where a simple lunch was laid out, sandwiches, a fresh salad, and the pastries Lauren had brought. Bella joined them at the table, chattering about her drawings and occasionally reaching for one of Alexander's hands, as if to assure herself he was still there. Halfway through the meal, Margaret popped in with paperwork for Alexander. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, setting a folder on the counter. "Just something that needs your signature." Alexander apologized to Lauren and flipped through the documents, his expression shifting from calm to concern. He sighed and handed the folder back. "It's the new land acquisition. We're running into pushback from some shareholders." Lauren recalled the man who had come to her cafe, Peter Whitmore. A nagging feeling told her he might be behind that pushback. She decided not to press Alexander for details in front of Bella, though. Once Margaret slipped out, Bella took Lauren's hand. "Can we draw together?" the child asked softly. Lauren smiled, glancing at Alexander for approval. He nodded, clearly grateful for any chance to see Bella's spirits lifted. As they settled back at the table with crayons in hand, Lauren felt a quiet sense of belonging. The sincerity in Bella's eyes Alexander's earnest gratitude, and even Margaret's supportive presence made her realize that their paths were becoming intertwined. The unexpected partnership to save her café was only part of the story. A deeper connection was forming, a connection that might test all of them in ways they hadn't yet imagined. Early the following week, Lauren was busy restocking shelves at Mitchell's corner when the door jingled, announcing a visitor. She glanced up, expecting a customer, only to see Peter Whitmore again. Dressed in a tailored suit, he wore a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mr. Whitmore," she greeted, adjusting her apron. "Welcome back." He ambled toward the counter, glancing around the cafe as if making mental notes. "It seems business is picking up," he remarked. "Lots of chatter about how this place got an infusion of funds from Thorn Enterprises." Lauren's hands stiffened around a canister of coffee beans. "We had some outside investment. Yes," she said carefully. "It allowed us to fix the plumbing." Peter chuckled. "I'm sure. Alexander has a generous heart." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "But just because he's invested doesn't mean others in the company share his enthusiasm." A chill threaded through Lauren's spine. "I'm not looking for trouble, Mr. Whitmore." Peter raised his eyebrows. "No one goes looking for it, Ms. Mitchell, but trouble sometimes finds those who stand in the way. Thorn Enterprises has big plans, and Alexander tends to make choices with his heart. That can be problematic for certain expansions." She tried to steady her voice. "I'm not sure I understand." He shrugged, feigning casualness. "Let's just say not everyone believes Alexander's personal interests should influence business decisions. Some might question your motives or his judgment." Frustration flared inside her. "I'm not manipulating Alexander, if that's what you're implying." Peter studied her, unblinking. "I suppose time will tell. You seem like a nice woman, Miss Mitchell, but you're out of your depth. Be mindful of that." He walked out, leaving the cafe door swinging in his wake. Lauren stood there, heart pounding, anger and worry tangling in her chest. Was he threatening me, she wondered, or just warning me? That afternoon she tried to focus on customers, but her mind kept drifting back to Peter's words. The next time Alexander texted to ask how the cafe was doing, she responded tersely, "We need to talk." He appeared at closing time, slipping in through the front door, just as Lauren was wiping down tables. She locked the door and flipped the sign to closed. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice edged with tension. Alexander looked around the empty cafe, noticing her anxious expression. "Everything all right?" Lauren set the rag on the counter. "Peter Whitmore was here. Again, he made it sound like people at Thorn Enterprises resent me, or resent you for helping me." His jaw tightened. "Peter can be a difficult man. He's been with the company a long time, but he's very set in his ways. He's never liked me mixing personal and professional matters." Lauren felt a swirl of hurt and confusion. "Am I just a personal matter? I'm worried he's going to sabotage your business, or the cafe." Alexander shook his head. "He can't sabotage it directly, but he has influence with some board members who might question my choices. I won't lie. This could create friction." She exhaled, leaning against the counter. "Maybe I should step back. Let you focus on your corporate ventures. I don't want to be a liability." His eyes flashed with conviction. "You're not a liability. You're someone who did the right thing. If Peter and others can't see that, it's their problem, not yours." Lauren swallowed hard, the emotions of the day crashing over her. "I just hate being a source of conflict." Alexander moved closer, placing a reassuring hand on her arm. "Trust me. You're not. This isn't about you. It's about Peter fearing any move I make that isn't strictly profit-driven." She nodded, trying to absorb his words. "So, what do we do?" He sighed. "We keep building the cafe's success. prove the investment was wise. Show them that integrity and empathy can still yield good returns. I've done it before with other ventures, and I can do it again. They stood there for a moment, the evening light casting long shadows through the front windows. Lauren could feel the steady warmth of his presence, a stark contrast to Peter's cold insinuations. A soft knock at the locked door startled them both. Lauren peeked outside and saw Maria, who had left her jacket behind. She unlocked the door. "Sorry, forgot this," Maria apologized, ducking in to grab the denim jacket from a hook. Spotting Alexander, she offered an awkward smile. "Hey, Mr. Thorne." He returned the greeting politely. Maria's gaze flicked between them, sensing the tension. "Everything okay?" Lauren forced a small smile. "Just fine. We'll close up in a minute." Once Maria left, Lauren turned back to Alexander. "I won't let Peter intimidate me. But I also can't ignore the possibility that he'll cause us trouble." Alexander squeezed her shoulder gently. "I'll handle Peter. You focus on what matters, your mother, your café, and your own well-being. Don't let his words get under your skin." She mustered a nod, though a knot of worry refused to dissolve entirely. He was right that the best thing she could do was run her café successfully and care for her mother. But a faint whisper in her mind warned her this was only the beginning of a larger battle. They parted ways outside the café, each lost in thought. As Lauren walked to her car in the fading twilight, she couldn't help but feel a chill wind at her back. An omen, perhaps, of the storms that might lie ahead. Over the next few weeks, a sense of mounting tension seeped into Lauren's life. Mitchell's Corner enjoyed a small boost in customers after the reopening, and the repairs held steady. Still, an undercurrent of unease lingered, primarily because of Peter Whitmore's veiled threats and her mother's worsening condition. One morning, Lauren awoke to find Caroline disoriented, wandering the apartment with her coat on backward. "Mom," she said, gently guiding her toward the kitchen table, "where were you going?" Caroline's eyes darted around, blinking in confusion. "I was looking for the library. I need to get the math textbooks for my students." Her voice wavered, and for a second Lauren glimpsed the dedicated teacher Caroline once was. Lauren felt a pang of sorrow. "We'll look for them together later," she reassured, coaxing her mother to sit. She prepared a glass of orange juice, heart aching. After making Caroline comfortable, she had only minutes to get herself ready before rushing to open the café. At Mitchell's Corner, she found Maria already busy frothing milk for a pair of cappuccinos. The aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the warm morning light streaming through the windows. A stack of newly printed flyers lay on the counter, showcasing the café's upcoming Spring Community Day, an event Lauren hoped would further boost business and foster goodwill in the neighborhood. Maria handed Lauren a latte order and a worried look. "You all right? You seem rattled." Lauren forced a faint smile. "Just a rough morning at home. My mom's getting more confused. Sometimes it feels like she's slipping away faster than I can handle." Maria reached out and squeezed Lauren's arm. "I'm here if you need anything." The door chimed, revealing Alexander, dressed more casually than usual, carrying a small bouquet of daisies. He offered a nod to Maria before stepping up to the counter. "Good morning, Lauren," he greeted softly. "These are for you, and for your mother. I remember you mentioning she liked daisies." Lauren's cheeks warmed. "You didn't have to do that." She inhaled the sweet scent of the flowers. "Thank you, this means a lot." He glanced around the cafe, which was bustling with half a dozen customers. "Place looks great," he said, giving a small nod of approval. "I wanted to check on how you're handling the upgrades and also see how you're doing." She gestured to a table in the corner. "Why don't you have a seat? I'll bring you some coffee." After delivering orders to other patrons, she joined him briefly. The hum of conversation formed a pleasant backdrop, punctuated by the hiss of the espresso machine. Alexander leaned in. "Mike mentioned you were finalizing the budget for your Community Day event. Any challenges?" "Funding, as always," Lauren admitted, "but I'm determined to make it work. We'll offer free samples, maybe have some local musicians. It's my way of giving back and drawing more foot traffic," he smiled. "I'd be happy to help if you need supplies or want to advertise. We could create a simple marketing campaign through Thorn Enterprises channels." Lauren considered his offer. Her pride still balked at accepting too much help, but time was short, and every boost mattered. "I appreciate it," she said finally. "Let me think on it." Before she could continue, she noticed Peter Whitmore stepping inside. He paused at the threshold, scanning the room with cool eyes. Lauren's stomach tightened. Alexander followed her gaze, his expression darkening. Peter approached their table with a forced smile. "Alexander, Miss Mitchell." "Busy morning, I see," he remarked, nodding at the occupied tables. Lauren stiffened. "We're doing well, yes." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Peter, is there something you need?" Peter arched a brow. "Just came to see how our investment is faring. Word on the board is that you're planning a community event. Generous, but let's hope it translates into profit." Heat rose to Lauren's cheeks, but Alexander cut in. "Lauren's approach has already improved foot traffic. If you have concerns, bring them to me, not her." Peter shrugged as if unconcerned. "Of course, I'll do just that." He pivoted on his heel and walked out, leaving a chill in his wake. Lauren exhaled, tension knotting her shoulders. "That man is relentless." Alexander placed a comforting hand over hers. "Don't let him rattle you. He's testing your resolve, and mine." He stood, preparing to leave. "Keep me updated on the Community Day. Let's make sure it's a success." She watched him go, the daisies resting on the table between them. In that moment, she felt both bolstered by Alexander's support and worn down by Peter's presence. It was as though two tides pulled at her, one offering hope, the other bringing a creeping sense of dread. By midday, the café settled back into a steady rhythm. Lauren put the bouquet in a mason jar behind the counter. Whenever she glimpsed the flowers, she allowed herself a flicker of optimism. Despite Peter's looming threats and Caroline's struggles, she was determined to move forward. For the remainder of the day, she pushed through orders, greeted customers with genuine warmth, and quietly planned the details for her community event. She had no illusions that the road ahead would be smooth. In fact, she sensed the biggest challenges were yet to come. But the cafe was alive again, and Caroline still recognized her face most days. As long as those two truths held, Lauren believed she could hold her ground against the gathering clouds. The following morning, Lauren arrived at Mitchell's corner in a haze of exhaustion. She had spent much of the night calming Caroline, who was convinced strangers were lurking outside the apartment. A doctor's appointment loomed on the horizon, offering few answers and more reminders that Alzheimer's was a slow, relentless thief. Maria noticed the dark circles under Lauren's eyes. "Why don't you take a break? I can handle the counter for a bit." Lauren gave a grateful nod. "Just for a moment, thanks." She retreated to the small storage room behind the kitchen, where she slumped onto a stool, her head in her hands. The air smelled faintly of cleaning supplies, coffee grounds, and pastries. She told herself to get it together. There was too much to do. A gentle knock startled her. "Lauren!" came Alexander's voice. She quickly straightened. He peeked in, concern evident in his eyes. "Maria said you were back here." "Oh," Lauren managed, pushing aside her embarrassment. "I didn't expect you today." He stepped inside, careful not to crowd her in the cramped space. I wanted to see how the community day preparations were going. Also, I hope to talk about your mother. Margaret mentioned you might need specialized in-home care. Lauren's shoulders sagged. She's having more episodes of confusion, nightmares, even paranoia. The doctor warned me we might reach a point where she needs round-the-clock supervision. Alexander leaned against a shelf lined with paper cups. If that time is here, I can recommend a great service. They specialize in dementia care. She hesitated, her voice wavering. That would cost a fortune. I'm barely covering her current costs. He didn't flinch. You have a partner now, remember? Let me help. His tone was gentle but resolute. Lauren's throat tightened. Accepting help for the café felt logical, like a business arrangement, but letting him fund her mother's care felt deeply personal, almost too intimate. She stared at the floor, torn between pride and desperation. Sensing her struggle, he lowered his voice. Lauren, I'd do this for any friend in need, but after what you did returning the suitcase, the letters, please understand, this is just me trying to be there for you. No strings. When she finally met his gaze, she saw genuine compassion. Slowly, she exhaled, tears threatening. Okay, she whispered, but I insist on paying back whatever you spend. He gave a small smile. You'll pay me back when the café is thriving, one step at a time. They left the storage room together. That afternoon, Alexander arranged for a reputable in-home care agency to send a nurse to evaluate Caroline's needs. Lauren was both relieved and guilty. She detested that her mother's dignity required charity from a man she was only starting to know, but she also saw no other choice. A few days later, the nurse, Emily Green, arrived at the apartment. She was in her 50s, with calm eyes and a comforting smile. Emily did a thorough assessment, asking Lauren about Caroline's routine, triggers, and emotional states. Caroline, initially suspicious, eventually warmed to Emily's gentle manner. Lauren hovered in the background, twisting her hands. Once Emily finished, she turned to Lauren. Your mother's at a stage where consistent structure and gentle reassurance are crucial. I can provide daily assistance, help with meals, bathing, medication reminders. It will take patience, but we'll give her the best quality of life possible. Thank you, Lauren murmured, her voice thick. I really appreciate it. They discussed scheduling and costs. Lauren's chest tightened when she saw the figures. But she remembered Alexander's words, you'll pay me back when the café is thriving. This arrangement was a lifeline, though it felt precarious. What if the café never makes enough, she wondered. But she pushed that fear aside, for Caroline's sake. Later that evening, Lauren collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion pulling at her limbs. Caroline was asleep in her bedroom, Emily having left a few hours earlier with a promise to return in the morning. The apartment was silent except for the muffled hum of traffic outside. Lauren's phone buzzed. A text from Alexander read, "How did it go with the nurse?" She typed back a quick update, followed by a sincere note of thanks. A moment later, his reply came, "Glad to help. Let me know if you need anything else." She stared at that message, a wave of conflicting emotions rising in her chest. Gratitude, vulnerability, a spark of something deeper she couldn't quite name. She set the phone aside, leaning her head against the back of the couch. The events of the last few days had forced her to accept help in ways she once resisted. Sitting alone in the quiet living room, she realized just how many silent sacrifices she'd been making, sacrificing her own well-being, sleep, and sense of security. For the first time in a long while, it felt like someone was truly sharing her burdens. She closed her eyes, letting the exhaustion wash over her. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Inside, she allowed herself a small moment of peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, like the upcoming Community Day event that was vital for the cafe's survival. But for tonight, she reminded herself, she was not alone. Days turned into a frantic rush as Community Day approached. Flyers were distributed around the neighborhood, social media posts promoted Mitchell's Corner, and Lauren arranged for a local guitarist to provide live music. Alexander quietly funded a portion of the marketing costs, though he stayed in the background, letting Lauren take the spotlight. Despite the flurry of activity, a heavy cloud weighed on her. Caroline's in-home care was better than nothing, but the nurse, Emily, noticed frequent episodes of confusion and restlessness. One evening, Caroline grew agitated, accusing Lauren of hiding her school papers. She paced the apartment for an hour, tears streaming down her face. It broke Lauren's heart to see her mother like that. Still, the cafe demanded attention. One afternoon, while finalizing the event schedule, Lauren heard raised voices near the entrance. She rushed out from behind the counter to find Peter Whitmore standing stiffly, speaking with Alexander in hushed but heated tones. "Peter," Lauren said, keeping her voice neutral, "is there a problem?" Peter turned to her, eyes cold. "Just a difference of opinion regarding Mr. Thorne's priorities. The board is concerned about another venture he's exploring that might stretch company resources. Seems he has a habit of dividing his attention." Alexander's jaw tightened. Peter is under the impression that supporting local businesses is a distraction, not an opportunity. Lauren suppressed a flare of anger. "Our community event is bringing positive attention. The foot traffic could eventually benefit your company." Peter cut her off. "Not everyone sees it that way. Some might argue that Thorne Enterprises has bigger fish to fry." Alexander forced a calm tone. "We'll resolve this at the next board meeting. Until then, Peter, I advise you to stop ambushing me in public venues." Peter fixed them both with a long, unreadable stare. "Be careful, Miss Mitchell. The line between personal and professional can be treacherous." With that, he left, the door slamming shut behind him. A tense silence lingered. Lauren looked at Alexander. "I'm sorry my cafe keeps causing friction for you." He shook his head. "This isn't your fault. Peter has his own agenda. But I won't lie. He's rallying certain shareholders to question my decisions." Worry pooled in Lauren's chest. "What happens if they force you to withdraw support?" Alexander inhaled slowly. "I'm not withdrawing anything. If it comes down to it, I'd rather fight them than back down. But let's not borrow trouble. Focus on making Community Day a success. Show everyone your cafe is worth investing in." Lauren nodded, grateful for his steadfastness, but she couldn't shake the unease creeping up her spine. She'd never wanted to be a pawn in corporate struggles. That evening, after closing up, she visited Caroline at home. Emily greeted her with a gentle smile, reporting that Caroline had been calmer that day. Relief flooded Lauren, though she knew it was a temporary reprieve. In her bedroom later, Lauren stared at the event flyers spread out on her small desk. She'd planned meticulously for the coming weekend: live music, free samples, children's activities. The success of that day could mean everything for the cafe's reputation and bottom line. She fiddled with a pen, recalling how simple her life had seemed a year ago, even with a divorce looming. "Now I'm dealing with corporate board politics, a wealthy partner, and a mother who barely remembers who I am." Her phone chimed, a text from Maria. "Count me in for Community Day prep tomorrow morning. We can handle it, boss." The enthusiasm in Maria's message bolstered Lauren's spirits. She typed back, "Thanks, I appreciate you more than you know." Even so, a sense of being on the brink lingered. The brink of success or failure. The brink of trust or betrayal. She wondered if Alexander felt the same uncertainty swirling around them. He was risking his reputation, maybe his standing at the company for her modest café. What if it all went wrong? She closed her eyes, leaning back in her chair. Doubts threatened to drown her optimism, but a flicker of determination remained. She might not be able to control corporate politics or Caroline's disease, but she could pour her heart into this event and prove that Mitchell's Corner was more than a shaky investment. In the stillness of the night, she reminded herself of the promise she'd made. As long as there's a chance, I'll fight for it. She'd done it when she returned that suitcase, risking her own financial salvation for the sake of honesty. She'd do it again to protect her mother and her café. The next days would be critical, but she'd walk that tightrope between hope and fear, trusting that her integrity would guide her forward. Saturday dawned bright and breezy, the perfect backdrop for Community Day. Lauren arrived at Mitchell's Corner before sunrise, adrenaline already surging through her veins. Maria joined her minutes later, and they got to work arranging decorations. Small potted flowers on each table, colorful balloons tied to the sidewalk sign, and a makeshift stage for the guitarist. By mid-morning, a lively crowd had gathered. Families with kids, curious neighbors, and loyal regulars filled the cafe and spilled onto the sidewalk. The guitarist strummed upbeat tunes, adding to the festive air. Lauren darted between tables, offering free mini-muffins and samples of gourmet coffee. She caught sight of local bloggers snapping photos, spurring her excitement that this event might trend on social media. A short while later, Alexander arrived with Bella in tow. The little girl's eyes shone with excitement. "It looks so fun," she exclaimed, gripping Alexander's hand. Lauren greeted them warmly, heart lifting when Bella flashed a shy smile. Margaret also made an appearance, quietly mingling with patrons and chatting about the cafe's renovation. Lauren felt touched by the support. For the first time in months, she believed Mitchell's Corner could truly thrive. In the midst of the bustle, Peter Whitmore strode in. He was alone, but the tension he brought was almost palpable. Lauren braced herself. He surveyed the event with a cool detachment, then approached Alexander near the pastry display. "I see quite a turnout," Peter said, glancing around. "Impressive for a small local cafe." Alexander didn't miss the condescending tone. "Community engagement, Peter. It's part of what we do." Peter's gaze flicked to Bella, who was sampling a sugar cookie with a grin. "And how does Bella like these ventures?" Alexander stiffened, stepping slightly in front of his daughter. "Bella's not part of this conversation." Lauren, sensing conflict brewing, stepped closer. "Is there something you need, Mr. Whitmore?" Peter offered a tight smile. "Just observing. I'm curious how this event translates into long-term profitability. Thorn Enterprises doesn't run on goodwill alone." The electric tension drew a few curious glances from nearby customers. Alexander lowered his voice. "This cafe has potential. The community aspect is part of the brand. You'll see the returns in time." Peter said nothing for a beat, then turned to Lauren. "Good luck. I'll be watching." Without waiting for a response, he strode off, disappearing into the crowd. Bella looked up at Lauren with round eyes. "He's scary," she murmured. Lauren knelt to meet Bella's gaze. "Don't worry, sweetie. He just doesn't understand how nice it feels to help people." Alexander placed a reassuring hand on Bella's shoulder, then turned to Lauren. "I'm sorry about that. He seems determined to be a thorn in our side." Lauren mustered a light laugh, ignoring the roil in her stomach. "Let's not let him ruin this day." As the afternoon wore on, the crowd only grew. A local newspaper reporter stopped by for an impromptu interview, drawn by the success of the event. Lauren excitedly explained the cafe's mission, serving quality coffee, bringing people together, and supporting a neighborhood that needed more positive gathering spaces. The reporter took notes with genuine interest, Every so often, Lauren's gaze landed on Alexander, who chatted with people or helped Bella pick out pastries. The sight of him in her cafe, mingling with her regulars, lit a spark of hope in her. She hadn't imagined herself forging a bond with a corporate mogul, yet their partnership felt increasingly natural. By late afternoon, the guitarist played a soft closing tune. People slowly trickled out, hugging Lauren or shaking her hand, congratulating her on a wonderful event. The flurry of color and activity wound down, leaving behind a pleasantly exhausted staff. Maria helped gather up chairs, while Lauren offered leftover pastries to the guitarist. Alexander took Bella home, but he promised to return shortly. Sure enough, he reappeared an hour later, sleeves rolled up to help with cleanup. "How do you feel?" he asked, wiping a table free of confetti scraps. Lauren's smile came easily, her cheeks flushed with lingering excitement. "It was amazing. I think we made a real impact." She gestured to a tip jar that overflowed with cash and a stack of business cards from new potential partners. "I haven't felt this hopeful in a long time." He set the cloth down, meeting her eyes. "You did it, Lauren. I just gave you a little push." She felt a rush of gratitude. "You've done more than you realize, helping with finances, my mom's care. I can never thank you enough." His expression softened. "I'm just glad you let me in." The moment stretched between them, warm and charged. Lauren's heart thudded. Before she could say anything else, Maria bustled over, snapping them back to reality. "Sorry, but we need more trash bags." She winked at Lauren, as if sensing the undercurrent. When the cafe was finally restored to its usual layout, night had fallen outside. Lauren flipped the sign to closed with a grateful sigh. This day felt like a turning point, a chance to show that her small corner of the world could stand tall. Even with Peter's shadow looming, she believed success was within reach. Tomorrow might bring more corporate squabbles, more challenges with Caroline's health. But for one night, Lauren embraced the triumph of a dream inching toward reality. She and Alexander stepped out onto the quiet street, side by side, each thankful for how far they'd come. News of Community Day's success spread quickly. A local news outlet featured Mitchell's Corner in an online article, praising the cafe's role in revitalizing the neighborhood. Lauren saw a spike in foot traffic and social media mentions, fueling her optimism. In contrast, tension within Thorn Enterprises appeared to intensify. Alexander confided in Lauren that Peter's faction on the board grew more vocal, questioning whether Alexander had the company's best interests at heart. "They're accusing me of using corporate funds for personal endeavors," he said one evening, pacing near the cafe counter after closing. "It's ludicrous, but I can't ignore the growing support for Peter's viewpoint." Lauren pressed her lips together. "Is there anything I can do to help? I could show them the financial reports for the cafe, the growing sales." He stopped pacing and faced her. "You're already helping by running a profitable, vibrant business. That's our best argument, real numbers. But you might need to speak to the board if they request it." Her stomach flipped at the thought of facing a boardroom of skeptical executives. "If it comes to that, I'll do it. I'm not afraid to defend what we've built." A trace of relief crossed his face. "Thank you." Yet outside of business, life weighed heavily on both of them. Caroline's condition varied day by day, plunging Lauren into moments of intense worry. She found Caroline once trying to escape the apartment, babbling about catching a bus to her old school. Emily managed to calm her, but Lauren realized that even home care might not suffice forever. One late afternoon, Caroline wandered into the cafe. Emily had stepped away to pick up medication, and Caroline got restless. She arrived at Mitchell's Corner just as the midday rush faded. Lauren hurried over. "Mom, you're supposed to be at home." Caroline's eyes were distant. "I needed to find my classroom. Am I late?" She scanned the cafe, confusion etched in every line of her face. Heart aching, Lauren guided her to a seat near the window. "It's all right. You're safe here." She offered a gentle smile, then brought Caroline a cup of chamomile tea. Some customers watched with curiosity, but Lauren ignored them, focusing solely on her mother's trembling hands. After a few minutes, Caroline calmed down enough to sip the tea. She looked at Lauren, recognition returning for a fleeting moment. "I'm sorry, I'm making everything difficult," she whispered, tears brimming. Lauren's own eyes blurred. "No, Mom, never apologize. I just want to help." Maria discreetly took over behind the counter while Lauren stayed with Caroline until Emily arrived. As the nurse led Caroline back to the apartment, Lauren leaned against the cafe's front door, her strength sapped by worry. In the midst of that vulnerable moment, Alexander arrived, noticing her pallor. "Lauren, what happened?" he asked, concerned, lighting his eyes. She described the incident in hushed tones. He rested a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry. That must have been hard." His voice softened. "You shouldn't have to go through this alone." Her eyes flickered with tears she refused to shed in public. "It's my mother. She's my responsibility." He nodded in understanding. "And I'm here, if you need me." They lingered in that quiet threshold for a moment, the cafe's lights casting warm halos on the sidewalk. She wanted to tell him how grateful she was, how scared she felt, how uncertain each new day had become. But the words stuck, tangled with emotion. Eventually, she swallowed and cleared her throat. "Thank you, Alexander. I'll be okay." He nodded, a faint sadness in his smile. "I know you will." The following morning, she received an email from the Thorn Enterprises board secretary, a formal invitation to present Mitchell's Corner's financials at the next board meeting. The email was polite but firm, implying that the cafe needed to justify the investment's merits once and for all. Lauren's gut clenched. "This is it," she thought. "They're forcing me to prove the cafe can stand on its own." She typed a brief reply, confirming she would attend, her heart thudding at the prospect of facing Peter's scrutiny in a room full of high-powered executives. That night, as she tried to rest, her thoughts spun. She wanted to protect Alexander from board backlash, shield Caroline from further distress, and keep Mitchell's Corner afloat. Am I strong enough to do all three? The question haunted her dreams. Yet an undercurrent of resolve steadied her. The cost of courage was high, but she'd already paid so much, her own security, her peace of mind. If standing before the board was what it took, she would do it. She owed it to Alexander's trust and to her own sense of integrity. And beneath all the stress, a quiet flame of hope burned, telling her she wasn't in this fight alone. Lauren Mitchell's stomach churned as she entered the imposing boardroom at Thorn Enterprises. A long mahogany table, flanked by floor-to-ceiling windows, reflected the early morning light. Several stern-faced board members were already seated, their laptops open and pens at the ready. Peter Whitmore, in particular, wore a stiff expression, tapping his pen on the table as if in impatient anticipation. Alexander Thorn sat at the head of the table, looking composed but undeniably tense. He caught Lauren's eye the moment she stepped in, and she forced herself to maintain a calm facade. Though her heart pounded, she reminded herself of the cafe's progress. Sales had improved. Their community event was a success, and every debt she owed him was documented in an organized repayment schedule. Margaret Hayes approached quietly. "You're seated over here," she murmured, guiding Lauren to a spot near Alexander. Lauren settled in, her hands clutching a folder stuffed with the cafe's financial statements and projections. This was the proving ground, the place where she'd have to demonstrate that Mitchell's Corner was not just a sentimental venture, but a viable investment. A senior board member, an older gentleman named Richard Collins, cleared his throat. Let's begin. Mr. Thorne, you've proposed continuing financial support for Mr. Mitchell's establishment. Some of us question the wisdom of allocating company resources to a relatively small enterprise. We need clarity on how this project aligns with our broader goals. Alexander nodded. Thank you, Mr. Collins. First, let me reiterate, the funds directed to Mitchell's Corner are part of my discretionary budget as CEO, not the general investment portfolio. I've chosen to support a local business that fosters community engagement, something Thorne Enterprises endorses as a facet of our corporate social responsibility. Peter's voice cut in, ice cold. If it's purely philanthropic, then it belongs under a charitable arm, not an investment strategy. But you've structured this as a business deal, correct? Ms. Mitchell retains majority ownership, while the company expects a financial return. Lauren's pulse quickened. She glanced at Alexander, who gave her a subtle nod to speak up. Yes, sir, she began, trying to keep her voice steady. My café has shown measurable growth since receiving this investment. We've handled overdue repairs, passed health inspections, and significantly boosted our customer base. I've brought reports of monthly revenue, a clear upward trend. She opened her folder and handed out printed charts, her fingers trembling slightly. The board members studied the documents, a few raised eyebrows at the positive numbers. Peter, however, flipped through the pages with a disinterested air. An increase in sales is commendable, yet your total revenue is still modest by our standards. What's the long-term outlook? He asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. Lauren inhaled, recalling the points she'd rehearsed. I've begun forging new partnerships with local artisans, planning seasonal community events, and expanding catering services to nearby offices. Additionally, I'll be introducing specialty menu items to attract a wider demographic. All of this is detailed in the 5-year projection on page 4. She managed a small smile. If we maintain our current growth curve, we'll surpass the initial investment return well before the 5-year mark. An attentive hush descended on the room as the board members studied the figures. Richard Collins thumbed through the proposals. Your numbers are optimistic but not impossible, he conceded. The cafe's performance in the last quarter is promising. Peter leaned back, crossing his arms. Optimism is nice, but it doesn't guarantee success. We need to consider the risk. If the cafe fails, Thorne Enterprises is left with a sunk cost. Alexander's jaw tightened. That risk is minimal, given the scope of our overall operations. More importantly, Ms. Mitchell has demonstrated honesty and initiative, returning something far more valuable to me than money. Her integrity is part of what this company values in partners. Peter's gaze hardened. Integrity is admirable, but we can't ignore the personal element at play. Some might claim nepotism or favoritism. Lauren's cheeks grew hot. I have no personal advantage here, other than Mr. Thorne's willingness to invest in what he believes is a viable business. I've documented every transaction, and if my cafe wasn't performing, I wouldn't be in front of you asking for continued support. I'd be apologizing for failing. A brief silence followed. Margaret, standing near the door, shot Lauren a supportive smile. At length, Richard cleared his throat again. I suggest we table the final decision until we've fully reviewed Miss Mitchell's updated proposal. However, from what I see here, there's potential. Alexander nodded. Thank you. In the meantime, I'll continue to oversee this investment personally, at my discretion. Though Peter still appeared unconvinced, he offered no further objections. Lauren released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The tension in her shoulders ebbed, replaced by cautious relief. While no formal vote was taken, it seemed she'd passed the first serious test. As the meeting adjourned and board members filed out, Alexander leaned over to Lauren. "You did well," he whispered. "I'm proud of you." She mustered a faint grin. "I appreciate it. But I have a feeling Peter won't back down easily." Alexander's gaze flickered with determination. "Then let him try. We have facts on our side, and sometimes that's enough." Lauren nodded, gathering her papers. Despite the lingering uncertainty, she felt stronger than before. This day had forced her to reveal the depths of her resolve. Standing among corporate titans, she discovered a voice she never knew she had. And that, she realized, was victory in itself. Following the intense board meeting, Lauren found solace at Mitchell's corner. She'd cleaned up after the lunch rush and now sat at a quiet table, sifting through the day's receipts. In the background, soft jazz played through the speakers, mingling with the faint hum of the fridge. The normalcy of it grounded her after the morning's high tension. She glanced at the cafe's front windows, noticing Caroline's silhouette approaching. Emily, the in-home nurse, was by her side, walking slowly. Lauren smiled, thankful her mother was getting some fresh air. When they entered, Caroline's gaze roamed with a lost but gentle curiosity. "Hi, Mom," Lauren said softly, standing to guide her to a comfortable chair. "Would you like some tea?" Caroline tilted her head. "Yes, with lemon, please," she murmured, as if recalling a long-ago habit. Emily nodded, stepping aside to let Lauren handle the personal touch. As Lauren prepared the tea, her thoughts raced back to the board meeting. She'd held her own against powerful figures, but the emotional strain had been immense. She half wished Caroline could comprehend the magnitude of that victory. If only she were well enough to celebrate with me, Lauren thought, stirring lemon into the cup. She returned to find Caroline absently rubbing the table's surface, her eyes distant. "Here we are," Lauren said, placing the tea in front of her. Caroline curled her fingers around the warm cup, seeming momentarily content. Emily took a seat across from Lauren, her voice low. "Your mother's having more cloudy days lately. Her confusion is deeper, and her short-term memory slips faster each week. I want to gently suggest we prepare for possible transitions, like a dedicated memory care facility." Lauren's throat went tight. She knew this day might come, but hearing the words stung. "Isn't there a way to keep her at home longer?" Emily sighed sympathetically. "We can try, but if she starts wandering or forgetting medication while I'm not around, it could be dangerous. Memory care communities are designed for round-the-clock supervision." Caroline sipped her tea, oblivious to their conversation about her future. Lauren fought the urge to cry. After all she'd faced, divorce, financial struggles, corporate battles, losing her mother's independence felt like yet another wrenching loss. But deep down, she understood Emily's reasoning. "I'll think about it," she whispered, forcing a weak smile. "Thank you for everything you do." Emily patted her arm. "You're doing your best, Lauren. Don't forget that." Later, once Emily and Caroline left, the cafe drifted into its quieter late-afternoon lull. Lauren sat alone, her mind whirling between the memory care decision and the board meeting's residual stress. A sense of helplessness threatened to engulf her. That evening, Alexander dropped by after he finished work, still in his crisp shirt and tie. He spotted her hunched over some papers at a back table. "You look like you've been through the ringer," he remarked gently. She gave a weary laugh. "I feel like it. The board meeting went about as well as it could, but it drained me. And I might have to move my mother into a full-time care facility soon." Concern etched into Alexander's face. He slid into the chair opposite her, resting his forearms on the table. "I'm sorry." "That can't be easy to accept," Lauren's voice wavered. "It's not. She hates leaving home for even an hour. I can't imagine how she'll react to a permanent facility. But I also know I can't provide the level of care she needs, especially while running the café. Alexander reached across the table, covering her hand with his. You don't have to do this alone. Let me help. We can research the best places together. Tears prickled at her eyes. It feels like every major challenge in my life has crashed down at once. I'm juggling too many burdens, and I'm terrified of dropping them all. He squeezed her hand lightly. I can't take your fear away, but I can stand beside you. You've shown remarkable strength. Remember that returning those letters, those precious pieces of my past, took courage. Every day since, you've fought for your mother, your café, and your integrity. If anyone can handle this, it's you. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but she managed to smile. The compassion and sincerity in his gaze melted some of the tension binding her chest. She thought about Bella, who'd lost her own mother far too soon. It gave her perspective on how deeply Alexander might relate to her struggle. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the cafe lights casting a warm glow over them. Eventually, he said, I also have to tell you something. I've postponed some acquisitions at Thorn Enterprises, partly because I want to channel resources into community initiatives. The board is unhappy, but it aligns with our values. Lauren let out a breath. You're really putting yourself on the line for this. He shrugged, a soft grin playing on his lips. I believe in doing the right thing. Sound familiar? She managed a small laugh. If it costs you your position, you might regret it. Never, he said firmly. What's a position worth if I can't act on my convictions? After a pause, he added, That's something Rebecca would have supported too. Lauren nodded, sadness and hope mingling at the mention of his late wife. She realized then how loss could unite people as well as tear them apart. With heavy burdens on both sides, they each found solace in a shared commitment to doing good. As they closed up the cafe and stepped outside under the fading twilight, Lauren squeezed Alexander's hand. Thank you for everything. He offered a gentle smile. Likewise, one step at a time, right? She nodded, gazing at the dim city lights. A new sense of resolve welled up inside her. She might face heartbreak over her mother and corporate battles still ahead, but she wasn't standing alone. And that single truth made her feel stronger than she had in a long while. The wind had a crisp bite as Lauren walked into Thorn Enterprises a few days later. She'd been invited by Alexander to discuss a new strategic outline for the cafe, one that might quell any lingering doubts from the board. Adjusting the strap of her handbag, she tried to ignore the apprehension coiling in her chest. Margaret Hayes greeted her warmly in the lobby, her efficient calmness a reassuring presence. Lauren, good to see you. Mr. Thorne is finishing up a call. He'll be right with you. Lauren nodded, following Margaret to a private conference room on the 20th floor. After a few minutes of waiting alone, Alexander entered, exuding a subdued energy. Thanks for coming, he said, offering a quick but genuine smile. He set a stack of documents on the table. We're going to put together a formal plan showcasing the cafe's expansion potential, partnerships, possibly franchising down the line if you're open to it. Lauren blinked. Franchising? That's a big leap. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. Just an idea for the future. The more robust the vision, the easier it'll be to defend this investment, but only if it aligns with your goals. She considered the notion. I never pictured multiple locations. I'm still trying to get my head around one, but I'm open to brainstorming. They began discussing possible expansions, from catering large events to leasing a second property for a bakery offshoot. Ideas flowed, some loftier than Lauren felt comfortable with, but she jotted them down anyway, aware that they needed a powerful presentation for the upcoming board review. Halfway through, a knock interrupted them. Peter Whitmore stepped in without waiting for permission. I heard we have a meeting, he said, voice laced with tension. "Wanted to see what's on the agenda." Alexander set his jaw. "We're planning the next phase for Mitchell's Corner. You'll have access to all relevant documents soon enough." Peter's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'd prefer to see them now." He strode forward, eyeing the notes scattered across the table. "Franchising, expansions, quite ambitious for a modest café." "Sounds risky." Lauren squared her shoulders. "Every venture starts with ambition. We've shown steady growth and community engagement. Isn't that what Thorn Enterprises strives for?" Peter smiled thinly. "Growth? Yes, but not at the expense of more lucrative projects. I'd hate to see valuable resources diverted to something that never truly takes off." Alexander's gaze hardened. "This is my call to make, Peter. Unless the board explicitly revokes my discretion, which I doubt they will." Peter's eyes flicked between them, calculating. "Very well. I'll await your presentation. Just be prepared for rigorous scrutiny." With that, he left, the tension lingering in his wake. Lauren exhaled. "He really doesn't quit." Alexander rubbed his temples. "He's growing bolder. I'm concerned he'll pull strings behind the scenes. We need to finalize our plan and stand firm." They resumed their discussion, but the encounter left a sour taste in Lauren's mouth. By the time they wrapped up, she felt mentally drained. As she gathered her things to leave, Alexander walked her to the elevator. "Thank you for going through all this." She mustered a faint grin. "Part of me is excited by the potential. Another part is overwhelmed. But I'll do whatever it takes to prove we're worth it." He pressed the elevator button. "That determination of yours is your strongest asset. Don't lose it." The doors slid open, and before she stepped in, he added, "I'll handle Peter. Focus on your vision." That evening at the café, she found herself scribbling notes about potential expansions, resource needs, and timelines. She felt a strange exhilaration, daring to imagine a bigger future than she'd ever considered possible. Yet behind it all lay the fear of her mother's decline. Could she really juggle rapid business growth and Caroline's worsening condition? Her phone buzzed. Emily's text, "Your mum's doing okay tonight, but seemed anxious about losing her job again." I reassured her. "Just wanted you to know." Lauren sighed, a wave of sadness crashing over her. Caroline's mind was drifting further back in time, clinging to the memory of teaching. Every mention of school or students reminded Lauren how fragile her mother's state had become. "I can't lose sight of what truly matters," she told herself. The cafe was important, yes, but Caroline came first. She vowed that if franchising or expansions ever compromised her ability to care for her mother, she'd pull back. No ambition was worth losing precious moments with the one who had guided her all her life. Still, she couldn't deny that Alexander's support and the cafe's success were profoundly tied to her mother's well-being. Without that support, Caroline's in-home care might become unaffordable, forcing a far more heartbreaking decision. By the time she closed up, her hands were trembling with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Outside, a cold wind swept through the quiet Chicago streets. Lauren locked the cafe door, gazing at the sign bearing its name. Her father's name, her legacy. She whispered a promise into the darkness, "I won't let fear win. Not now." The following week, Lauren juggled finalizing her expansion proposal with managing daily operations at the cafe and overseeing her mother's care. Emily's evening updates on Caroline ranged from hopeful to heartbreaking. One moment, Caroline would recall fond details of Lauren's childhood, and the next, she'd mistake Lauren for a former student. After closing one evening, Lauren stayed behind to tally the day's receipts. The front door chimed, signaling someone had entered. She glanced up, assuming it might be a late delivery person or Maria returning for something. Instead, Bella stood there with a hesitant smile, a small backpack slung over her shoulder. "Bella!" Lauren exclaimed, puzzled. "Where's your dad?" "I'm here," Alexander's voice echoed from just outside. A moment later, he appeared, carrying 2 pizza boxes. "Hope you don't mind us dropping in," Lauren laughed in surprise. "Not at all. I was about to lock up, but you're welcome." She ushered them in, flipping the sign back to open for a private visit. "Pizza, now that's something I can get behind." Alexander set the boxes on a table, and Bella eagerly scrambled onto a chair. "Dad said we could have dinner with you," she explained, unzipping her backpack to reveal colored pencils and a sketch pad. "I brought things to draw with." Lauren's heart warmed. "I'd love that." She fetched plates and napkins from behind the counter. As they sat together, the tension of the day ebbed away. Bella chatted about school, proudly showing Lauren a drawing of them holding hands outside the café. "This is beautiful," Lauren said softly, touched by the childish depiction. She felt a surge of gratitude that Bella was comfortable enough to include her in such a cherished part of her imagination. Alexander watched them with a tender expression. "I wanted Bella to see where you spend your days," he said, giving a small shrug. "Also, I've been working late a lot, so dinner here seemed like a nice change of pace." Lauren took a bite of pizza, realizing it was the first time she'd eaten all day. "Thank you. It's nice to have company while I finish up." They chatted about the cafe's sales, Bella's latest favorite cartoon, and even a humorous story Margaret had shared about a minor office fiasco. For a little while, it felt like they were just 3 people enjoying a casual meal, no looming board battles, no heartbreaks. When Bella grew bored with adult talk, she turned her attention to her drawing pad, humming quietly under her breath. After they finished eating, Alexander helped clean up. "Hey, Bella," he said gently, "why don't you show Lauren your new art book? I'll take care of these boxes." Bella's face lit up. She slid off her chair, plopping down on the floor near the counter, flipping through pages of her sketches, flowers, a house, some abstract shapes. Lauren knelt beside her, pointing out the small details. "You're really talented," she praised, remembering how Bella once used art to process her grief over her mother's letters. A subtle pang of sorrow reminded Lauren that Bella's mother, Rebecca, would have loved to see these drawings. She wished Caroline were healthy enough to share such moments too. Someday, Lauren mused, maybe Bella and Caroline could connect in some small way, but that day felt painfully far off. Once the cafe was tidy, the 3 of them stepped outside into the cool evening air. Alexander held Bella's hand while Lauren locked up. She paused on the threshold, gazing at the familiar sign. The warm moment between them felt fragile but real, a bright spot against the shadows of her daily anxieties. Alexander faced her, something like pride shining in his eyes. "We might have more battles ahead, but remember moments like this. They remind us why we're fighting." Bella, tired from the evening's excitement, rested her head on her father's arm. Lauren gently brushed a stray curl from the girl's forehead. "Thank you both for coming tonight," she said, her voice soft. Alexander nodded, reading the mixture of emotions in her face. "Anytime. We're in this together, remember?" They exchanged goodbyes, and Lauren watched them walk off under the glow of streetlights, Bella's small hand wrapped in Alexander's. A sense of longing surged within her. For an instant, she imagined a future where such dinners were a common occurrence, a true sense of family, forged in kindness and understanding. As she headed home to her mother, the night felt strangely comforting. Yes, her burdens remained, but for the first time in years, she sensed genuine hope for love, healing, and shared purpose. That hope buoyed her spirits, even as her phone buzzed with an email notification from Margaret about the upcoming board review. The real test was yet to come. but she felt less alone in facing it. The tension inside Thorn Enterprises reached a breaking point on the day of the final board review for Mitchell's Corner. Lauren arrived at dawn, not wanting to be late for the afternoon session. She quietly set up her laptop and presentation materials in a small conference room adjacent to Alexander's office. Every now and then, she peered through the glass wall into the corridor, seeing staff hurrying about with purposeful strides. Alexander joined her mid-morning, wearing a steely resolve. "We'll face the board at 2 o'clock, he said. "I've rallied some supportive members, but Peter's camp is pushing for a more conservative approach, less local investment, more focus on large-scale acquisitions. We need to be ready for anything." Lauren nodded, a swirl of anxiety churning in her stomach. "I've got updated figures from the café, including the positive publicity from Community Day, and I prepared charts projecting a stable profit margin if we expand carefully." He gave her a faint but encouraging smile. "That should help. Just remember, speak from the heart when they question you. Facts are vital, but passion and authenticity matter too." When 2 o'clock arrived, the boardroom hummed with low murmurs. Peter Whitmore stood near the window, exuding confidence as he conversed with a few allies. Richard Collins offered Lauren a polite nod, and Margaret Hayes gave her a whispered "good luck" as she walked by. Alexander formally opened the session, outlining the agenda. "We're here to finalize our stance on the Mitchell's Corner investment. Ms. Mitchell has prepared additional data." Lauren took the floor, her heart pounding. She briefly summarized the cafe's recent successes: increased sales, positive media coverage, community growth. Then she clicked through slides detailing potential expansions. As she spoke, she sensed the room's collective energy shift. Some seemed impressed, others guarded. Peter stepped in with questions, each one sharper than the last. "Your social media following is still modest. How do you plan to reach a broader audience? What evidence do we have that these expansion ideas will yield long-term profit? What's to stop competitor cafes from capturing the same market?" Lauren did her best to answer calmly, relying on her slides and genuine belief in the cafe's mission. Yet each challenge left her rattled, until one final question cut deeper than she expected. "Miss Mitchell," Peter said, "it's no secret you struggled financially before Mr. Thorne stepped in. Given your mother's health issues and your lack of prior corporate experience, how can we trust that you'll remain committed if times get tough again? Couldn't you simply fold, leaving Thorne Enterprises holding the bill?" A stunned hush fell over the room. Lauren's pulse throbbed in her temple. "I won't deny I've faced hardships, but I didn't fold when I was at my lowest. I returned money I could have easily kept because integrity mattered more than quick fixes. I continued to run my cafe even when it nearly went under because it's my dream. My mother's condition is heartbreaking, but it only strengthens my resolve to provide for her and make the cafe a success." She paused, scanning the faces at the table. "I'm not in this for a quick win. I'm in it for the long haul because I believe in what I'm doing and because I owe it to everyone who's believed in me, including Mr. Thorne." Some board members murmured amongst themselves. Richard Collins leaned forward. "That was quite a statement, Ms. Mitchell. I respect your candor." Peter opened his mouth to retort, but Alexander cut him off. "We've heard enough to make an informed decision. Let's put it to a vote. Those in favor of continuing the investment in Mitchell's Corner under the current terms, with potential for expansion, indicate so now." Hands went up around the table, more than half. Peter's jaw tightened as he realized he was outnumbered. When the final count came in, the board had voted to approve, granting Alexander latitude to proceed with the partnership. Lauren let out a shaky breath, relief and disbelief surging through her. Alexander closed the session, and the board members filed out. Some offered neutral nods, others genuine congratulations. Peter brushed past Lauren, pausing just long enough to mutter, "This isn't the end, Ms. Mitchell. Mark my words." Then he stalked off. Though his parting remark gave Lauren a jolt of unease, she couldn't dwell on it. She turned to Alexander, who enveloped her in a brief but heartfelt hug. "You did it," he said, voice low. "They saw what I see in you." Her eyes glistened. "I think they saw what we've built together, something worth fighting for." Margaret appeared at the doorway, a broad smile on her usually reserved face. "Congratulations, you two. Looks like Mitchell's Corner has a future." Lauren laughed, exhaustion mingling with triumph. "It certainly does." Outside the boardroom windows, the Chicago skyline stretched under the afternoon sun, a panorama of possibility. For the first time since this all began, Lauren felt like the city itself was opening doors for her. Yes, problems remained, her mother's care, Peter's ongoing hostility, but in this moment, victory tasted sweet. She left Thorn Enterprises with Alexander, both of them walking side by side toward the elevator. An unspoken understanding passed between them. They were allies in every sense now, bound by shared ideals and tested by challenges that had only strengthened their resolve. Stepping into the elevator, Lauren caught her reflection in the polished doors. She looked tired, proud, and most of all, determined. Perhaps the real reward wasn't just the board's approval, but the hard-won confidence that she could meet whatever trials lay ahead. The day after the board's approval felt like the quiet after a thunderstorm. Mitchell's Corner opened its doors to the usual morning rush, office workers grabbing coffee, an elderly neighbor coming in to savor a donut. But to Lauren, everything looked brighter. She marveled at how much had changed. Only a few weeks ago, she was on the brink of losing the café entirely. Now she had not only survived the corporate gauntlet, but also glimpsed a genuine partnership with Alexander that went deeper than finances. Still, a fresh layer of reality settled in. The café's success came with expectations, expansions, new marketing strategies, possibly franchising. And then there was Caroline, whose mind slipped further into confusion each day. Victory in the boardroom didn't erase the toll her mother's illness took on her heart. Late that afternoon, she carefully balanced a tray of mocha lattes, delivering them to a group of chatty college students who had commandeered a large table. Maria passed behind her with a grin. "Boss, you seem upbeat. Good news from Thorn Enterprises." Lauren couldn't help but smile. "They officially greenlit our partnership. The cafe's here to stay, and we'll be exploring more growth soon." Maria let out a whoop of excitement, drawing laughter from the students. "That's amazing. Let's celebrate once you get some breathing room." Lauren thanked her, warmth flooding her chest. The cafe felt more alive than it had in months. Customers lingered with conversation and laughter, the steady hiss of the espresso machine serving as a comforting backdrop. She realized how the space had grown beyond just a business. It was a hub of connections, small kindnesses, and everyday joy. Yet, by early evening, a phone call shattered the calm. Emily, the nurse, reported that Caroline had fallen at home. "She's not seriously hurt," Emily assured, "but she's very disoriented. I think she might need a thorough check at the hospital." Panic seized Lauren's gut. She hurriedly handed the cafe's closing duties to Maria and raced to her car. The drive felt interminable, her mind whirling with grim possibilities. Arriving at the small emergency clinic, she found Caroline sitting on a cot, a bandage on her forearm. Her eyes were distant, frightened. "Mom, I'm here," Lauren said softly, sinking to her knees beside the cot. Caroline blinked, recognition flickering. "I tripped," she said in a small voice. Everything felt so fuzzy. Tears brimmed in her eyes. I don't know what's happening to me." Lauren's throat constricted. She remembers enough to realize she's losing herself. Carefully, she took her mother's hand, glancing at Emily, who stood nearby, looking worried. The doctor approached, explaining that while Caroline hadn't broken any bones, she was severely dehydrated and might have fainted. She'd be kept overnight for observation. A rush of conflicting emotions battered Lauren: relief that Caroline wasn't seriously injured, guilt that she hadn't been there, and heartbreak over the inevitability of her mother's decline. The doctor's gentle recommendation echoed Emily's. It might be time to consider a memory care facility where she can have 24/7 assistance. Lauren stayed by Caroline's side until the nurses moved her to a quiet observation room. Just as she was about to call Alexander with an update, she felt a hand on her shoulder. Turning, she was startled to see him standing in the hallway, concern etched in his features. "Margaret called me," he explained. "Said there was an emergency." "How is she?" Lauren swallowed back tears. "She'll be all right physically, but the doctor wants me to consider full-time care." Her voice trembled. "I just don't know if I can do that. She's my mom. I promised I'd look after her." Alexander's gaze was full of empathy. "Sometimes caring means admitting we can't do it all ourselves. You're not failing her, Lauren. You're protecting her." She leaned against him, the weight of the day pressing down. "I'm so tired of feeling helpless," she murmured. He stroked her hair gently. "You're anything but helpless. Let's explore the options. We'll find the best place. A caring environment." His voice wavered, as though recalling his own helplessness with Rebecca's final days. "You don't have to do this alone." They lingered in that hospital corridor, both of them drawn together by sorrow and determination. In her mother's fragile state, Lauren recognized the stark truth. No business success, no boardroom triumph could fill the void left by watching a loved one slip away. Yet, in that same breath, she felt Alexander's presence as a steady anchor, reminding her that while some battles can't be won, one can still choose a path of compassion and dignity. By the time she drove home that night, exhaustion settled like a blanket over her shoulders. She trudged up the stairs to her apartment, mind spinning with the next steps, paperwork, touring facilities, explaining it all to Caroline. She thought of the café, how only hours ago she had been riding the high of newfound stability. Life changes in a heartbeat, she realized. In her darkened living room, she sank onto the couch, hugging a throw pillow to her chest. She allowed herself a single, cleansing sob. Then, through tears, she whispered a vow. "I will do what's right for you, Mom, no matter how much it hurts." Tomorrow, she would visit Caroline in the hospital, and they'd face the difficult choices ahead. The momentum of her recent triumph now had to yield to a deeper calling, the call to love unconditionally, even when love demanded letting go of her most cherished illusions. Caroline stayed at the hospital for 2 days, long enough for the doctors to confirm that her confusion was escalating. Each time Lauren visited, she found her mother disoriented but mildly relieved by the routine of nurses checking vitals and ensuring safety. Alexander accompanied her on the 2nd day, offering quiet support. Bella stayed in the waiting room, absorbed in a coloring book, sensing the gravity of the situation but not fully understanding. On the evening Caroline was discharged, Lauren sat beside her in a wheelchair, pushing toward the hospital exit. She'd arranged for a short-term respite care facility, an in-between option until they decided on a permanent memory care solution. Caroline clutched at Lauren's hand, her eyes darting around. "Where am I?" she whispered. Lauren pressed her lips together, fighting tears. "I'm taking you somewhere safe, Mom. I promise." The facility, Sunset Glen, was clean and calm, staffed by nurses trained in dementia care. The pastel walls featured cheerful art and gentle music played in the common areas. Caroline grew quiet, her anxious questions replaced by an almost childlike curiosity. She gravitated toward a table with puzzles, though she set the pieces down without forming a single shape. Watching from a short distance, Lauren felt a painful knot in her stomach. The woman who once led a classroom of eager students was now struggling to fit puzzle pieces meant for kindergarteners. Alexander, sensing her distress, rested a hand on her shoulder. "She's where she needs to be, at least for now," he said gently. Lauren nodded, swallowing back grief. She pressed a kiss to Caroline's cheek before leaving, vowing to visit daily until she could figure out the next step. The next morning, she threw herself into café duties. The expansion plan demanded attention, a new marketing push on social media, meeting with a local real estate agent to discuss a possible second location. She held back tears while measuring coffee grounds and greeting customers with forced cheer. "Work keeps me functional," she told herself. Mid-afternoon, Bella wandered in with Margaret while Alexander attended a nearby meeting. The little girl approached Lauren with a shy smile. "Dad said I could hang out here with you and see the behind the scenes. Is that okay?" Lauren's heart softened. "Of course." She guided Bella into the kitchen area, showing her the espresso machine, the racks of pastries in the oven, and the neat bins of coffee beans labeled by region. Bella listened intently, occasionally asking innocent questions like, "Which pastry is your favorite?" or "Do you ever get tired of coffee?" By the time Margaret returned to collect her, Bella seemed almost gleeful, as though she'd glimpsed a secret world. Lauren felt something akin to maternal warmth well inside her, a surge of protectiveness and joy. She realized Bella filled a space in her life that had been empty for too long. Later, while tidying tables, Lauren found a simple pencil sketch Bella had left behind. It showed two figures standing in a cafe, one tall, one shorter, both smiling. A swirl of hearts and coffee cups surrounded them. It made Lauren smile through sudden tears. "She drew us," Lauren realized, her chest tightening with unexpected emotion. As closing time approached, Alexander arrived to pick Bella up. He noticed the sketch on the counter, recognition dawning. "She's been drawing you a lot lately," he said softly. Lauren traced the lines of the childlike drawing. "I'm flattered. She's a sweet girl." "She adores you," Alexander continued, "and I can't thank you enough for what you've done. Not just for me, but for Bella. She lost her mother so young. Having a figure like you to trust, it means the world to her." Lauren's eyes flicked up to meet his. A hush fell between them, charged with unspoken feelings. She recalled the early days, returning that black suitcase, uncertain if Alexander was just another corporate executive. "How far we've come," she thought, marveling at the bond forged through mutual compassion. Eventually, Alexander broke the silence. "How's Caroline?" Lauren lowered her gaze, settling into the respite facility. It's so hard to see her like that." She hesitated, then softly added, "I miss the days when she was just my mom, not a patient." Alexander nodded, sympathy etched into his features. "I've been there, in a different way. When Rebecca got sick, everything changed overnight. I only wish I had recognized how precious our time was sooner." She reached for his hand, surprising them both. "You're recognizing it now," she said, voice trembling. "That's what matters." They stood that way for a moment, two people weaving together the fragile threads of their separate lives. His role as a father and CEO, her life as a daughter and cafe owner. The corridor of memory and grief stretched behind them, but a corridor of hope lay ahead. An abrupt pounding on the cafe door startled them. Peter Whitmore's silhouette loomed in the fading light outside, stirring the tension in Lauren's chest. She glanced at Alexander, who grimaced. "What is he doing here now?" he muttered under his breath. Lauren opened the door cautiously, bracing for confrontation. Peter stepped in, his face set in grim lines. "We need to talk, Alexander, and Miss Mitchell should hear this too." Lauren exchanged an uneasy look with Alexander. What now, she wondered, her pulse quickening. The expansion plan had just been approved. Surely Peter wasn't about to sabotage it in person. Yet the ominous set of his jaw warned her that this visit was far from friendly. Peter Whitmore strode into the café, carefully shutting the door behind him. His eyes flitted over the cozy interior, empty tables, a few chairs stacked in the corner, before settling on Lauren and Alexander. The tension was palpable. Alexander crossed his arms. "You've made your dislike of our arrangement clear. So what's this about, Peter?" Peter inhaled slowly, as if steadying himself. "I realize your little cafe plan got approved, but certain shareholders remain uneasy. They've tasked me with ensuring that if anything goes wrong, any mismanagement, any hint of scandal, Thorn Enterprises can pull out." Lauren's stomach twisted. "Why come here in person?" Peter's gaze flicked to her. "Because, Miss Mitchell, I don't think you fully grasp the gravity of your situation. One slip, one PR fiasco or financial shortfall, and the board will pressure Alexander to end this partnership. Your cafe expansions, your precious in-home, or rather institutional care for your mother, poof, gone." A protective anger surged in Lauren. "I'm well aware of the stakes. Mitchell's Corner is succeeding. We're not mismanaging funds, and we're certainly not planning any scandal." Peter's lip curled. "Accidents happen. Reputations tarnish. I'm here to warn you because, despite my role, I'd rather not see the company entangled in legal nightmares." Alexander took a step forward, his voice steely. "This sounds like a threat. If you have concrete concerns, address them through the proper channels, my office, the board. Don't corner Lauren in her own shop." Peter's brow twitched. "I'm fulfilling my duty, Alexander. It's your personal involvement that complicates everything. Mixing your philanthropic impulses with corporate funds is risky. You already fought one board battle. Do you want to fight another?" He glanced at Lauren again, his gaze a mixture of pity and challenge. "Your story might be touching, Ms. Mitchell, but sentiment alone doesn't guarantee success." A trembling coursed through Lauren's limbs. She thought of her mother, the expansions, Bella's hope-filled drawings. Everything she fought for wove through her mind like a protective shield. Taking a slow breath, she planted her feet. "Mr. Whitmore, I have no illusions about how easily life can fall apart. But let me make one thing clear. Mitchell's Corner stands on honest work and honest intentions. We won't fail because of a manufactured crisis. If you want to dig for dirt, go ahead. You won't find any." Peter considered her words, then looked to Alexander. "I've said my piece. If a crisis arises, remember this conversation." Without further explanation, he turned and left, the door rattling behind him. For a long moment, neither Lauren nor Alexander spoke. The cafe seemed eerily silent. Finally, Lauren let out a shaky exhale. "He's trying to intimidate us into backing down," Alexander nodded, frustration etched into his features. "He thrives on fear, and he's determined to discredit any venture he deems unworthy." Lauren rubbed her temples. "But everything we've done is legitimate. The board already signed off. Why is he so relentless?" Alexander's shoulders sagged. "I suspect he's afraid of losing influence. If my community-focused initiatives succeed, it sets a precedent for more decisions like these. Peter prefers the old guard approach, big deals, cold calculations. Seeing real lives involved undermines his power." A surge of resolve blazed within Lauren. "Then let him keep trying. We'll show him that a small local business can flourish with integrity. We'll make sure no manufactured crisis arises." He smiled grimly, nodding. "Agreed. We just have to remain vigilant, watch every detail, keep the books squeaky clean, deliver consistent growth. And if there's a personal attack, we stand together." They locked eyes, the gravity of the moment settling in. "Stand together," Lauren repeated softly. Soon after, Alexander headed home to Bella, leaving Lauren alone in the dimly lit café. She took a moment to steady herself, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the soft buzz of lights. Peter's ominous remarks rattled around in her mind. One slip, a single misstep could ruin everything. Her phone buzzed, jarring her from brooding thoughts. It was a text from the respite care facility, reporting that Caroline had been agitated but was now settling down. Lauren sighed, torn between relief and guilt for not being there in person. She locked up and made her way to Sunset Glen, wanting to see her mother despite the late hour. Once she arrived, a night nurse led her to Caroline's room. She found her mother dozing, hands clutched around a stuffed teddy bear someone must have given her. The sight was both sweet and heartbreaking. Pulling a chair beside the bed, Lauren gently took Caroline's free hand. "Hey, Mum," she whispered, not sure if Caroline could hear her. The older woman stirred, opening her eyes just enough to recognize her daughter's face. For a fleeting second, clarity returned. "My Lauren," Caroline murmured, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. Emotion surged in Lauren, tears burning her throat. "It's me," she whispered. "I'm here." Caroline's weak grip tightened. "You do what's right." "You always do what's right, remember?" Then her eyes slipped closed again, drifting into a peaceful slumber. Lauren blinked back tears, remembering how those very words once guided her to return a suitcase full of money. She thought of Alexander, Bella, the cafe, the expansions, and even Peter's threats. "Yes, Mom," she vowed silently, stroking Caroline's frail hand. "I'll keep doing what's right, no matter the cost." In the weeks that followed Peter's final warning, life settled into a precarious balance. Lauren pushed forward with the cafe's expansion plans, finalizing new menu items, hosting small weekend events, and quietly exploring real estate options for a second location. Alexander, on his end, juggled corporate obligations, shielding their partnership from naysayers, while devoting evenings to Bella. Late one Tuesday, as the cafe closed, Lauren received a call from Sunset Glen. "We think Caroline's condition is declining more rapidly," the nurse said gently. "She's been restless, calling for you. You might want to come in tonight." Heart hammering, Lauren drove through the dark streets, headlights illuminating the familiar route to the facility. Let her be okay, please. She recalled the doctor's caution that advanced Alzheimer's could lead to sudden changes in health, including the risk of pneumonia or other complications. Fear gnawed at her as she parked and rushed inside. She found Caroline in her room, thrashing weakly against the sheets, her breathing labored. Nurses surrounded her, speaking softly in comforting tones, trying to calm her. Lauren's chest tightened at the sight. Her mother's eyes were panicked, as if she was lost in a nightmare. Taking a seat on the edge of the bed, Lauren gently placed a hand on Caroline's arm. "Mom, it's me," she whispered. For a moment, Caroline didn't recognize her. Then, as if a fog lifted, her eyes locked onto Lauren's. Don't let me go," she pleaded in a rasping voice. "I won't," Lauren promised, tears welling. She smoothed back Caroline's grey hair, which had grown disheveled from her struggle. Slowly, the older woman's breathing steadied. The nurses stepped back, allowing mother and daughter a moment of privacy. Alexander appeared in the doorway, having been notified by Margaret. He hovered respectfully, holding Bella's hand. The little girl looked worried, but resolute, as if she understood this was a solemn time. Caroline's gaze flickered toward them. A subtle frown crossed her features, then a fragile smile. "Bella," she murmured, surprising everyone by speaking the child's name clearly. Bella, shy, approached the bed, unsure what to do. Lauren guided her closer. "You can hold her hand," Lauren said softly. "She's happy to see you." Bella placed her small hand on Caroline's, and the older woman's gaze softened as if recognizing innocence. Lauren felt an ache in her chest. Caroline had never fully known Bella, yet something about the girl's gentle presence seemed to soothe her. One of the nurses gently checked Caroline's vitals, then whispered to Lauren, "She's stabilized for now, but her body's weak. You might want to stay overnight." As the evening wore on, Alexander took Bella home, promising to return in the morning. Lauren remained at Caroline's side, dozing in a chair, waking whenever her mother stirred. At one point, Caroline reached out, grasping Lauren's hand with surprising strength. Her eyes found Lauren's, and she spoke in a voice quivering with emotion. "I'm sorry. You had to carry so much." Tears slipped down Lauren's face. "Mom, it's okay. I love you." A rare clarity lit Caroline's gaze. "I love you too," she whispered, so proud. Lauren's breath hitched. For a moment, it was as though Caroline was fully present, the disease pushed aside by sheer love. Then her eyelids fluttered shut, and she drifted off, breathing shallow but peaceful. In the morning, Alexander returned without Bella, letting her stay home to rest. He found Lauren exhausted but alert. Over cups of lukewarm hospital coffee, they talked in hushed tones about the café, the expansions, and potential memory care facilities that offered a hospice-like environment should Caroline's health worsen further. "You're doing everything you can," Alexander reassured. Lauren nodded, though her heart felt torn to pieces. "I know." 2 days later, Caroline slipped into a final quietness. Surrounded by a nurse and Lauren, she simply stopped responding. Her breathing slowed, and within hours, she passed peacefully in her sleep. It was a soft, gentle departure, like a candle flame flickering out. Lauren, tears streaming, kissed her mother's forehead, whispering words of gratitude and heartbreak. In the aftermath, the days blurred. Arrangements had to be made. The café needed her presence. Yet Lauren floated through tasks in a haze, leaning heavily on Maria and Alexander. Sympathy cards poured in from customers who'd grown fond of the stories Lauren shared about Caroline. Bella, sensing Lauren's sadness, drew pictures of an angel with grey hair, leaving them on the café counter as silent condolences. At the funeral, a small gathering of friends, café regulars, and staff from Sunset Glen came to pay respects. Alexander stood beside Lauren, offering an arm to steady her whenever she faltered. Bella clutched a small bouquet of daisies, the flowers Caroline once loved. The final goodbye was raw, tears breaking through Lauren's composure as she spoke a eulogy about her mother's devotion to teaching and her unwavering moral compass. Caroline's absence left a hollow place in Lauren's life. Yet in that emptiness, she felt a sense of resolve. If Mom taught me one thing, it was to live with integrity and compassion. In the weeks that followed, Lauren gradually returned to the café routine. A hush had fallen over her spirit, but the sadness was gently met by kindness at every turn. A note slipped under the café door with heartfelt condolences, an older customer offering a story about how Caroline once helped him with reading lessons. Even Peter Whitmore, surprisingly, sent a brief email expressing sympathy, though he added a note about the next board review. One evening, as the sun set over Chicago, Lauren stood in front of Mitchell's Corner and gazed at the sign. She remembered Caroline's last moment of lucidity, the final words of love. A tear slid down her cheek, mingling grief with gratitude. Alexander appeared behind her, quietly slipping his hand into hers. "She'd be proud," he said softly, eyes on the sign, "and wherever she is, she knows you'll carry on her values." Lauren closed her eyes, inhaling the cool night air. "I want to do more," she confessed, turning to face him. "Open a second location, hire staff who need a second chance, people like me who just need someone to believe in them. Make the café a place of support." His gaze shone with admiration. "That's a beautiful vision." We'll make it happen. They stood there, side by side, the city lights flickering around them. In that moment, Lauren felt Caroline's memory settle into her heart, not as a weight, but as a gentle, guiding flame. She squeezed Alexander's hand, thinking of Bella and how they were building something new together, a family forged by honest choices and unwavering compassion. And for the first time since her mother's passing, Lauren allowed herself a small smile. Yes, she had lost something irreplaceable, but in the process, she'd found a different kind of love and purpose, one that promised to carry her forward, no matter how winding the road. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.